It's strange and too suspicious, Shui Yenyu declared immediately when they had returned to their own courtyard. Ling Han nodded and exclaimed, "My wife is brilliant." Shui Yenyu rolled her eyes at him in annoyance and asked, "You are showing off your foresight, aren't you? All my achievements are inevitably linked to the teachings of my wife. Aren't you my teacher?" Ling Han asked, smiling. Shui Yenyu's beautiful face involuntarily flushed. She had indeed been Ling Han's teacher for a while, and in the end, Ling Han was close to dragging her into bed by now. Though the two of them were not master and disciple, but rather teacher and student, the mere thought of it still caused her much embarrassment. That Chui De obviously did not want us to go and investigate. According to him, the people here are accustomed to resting early. So how could he possibly be standing guard there at such a late hour at night otherwise? He is obviously monitoring us. Ling Han nodded and said, "Unfortunately, I am, by nature, a curious person. The more you do not want me to know, the more I want to find out." This time, Shui Yenyu was supportive of Ling Han and asked, "Then will we be sneaking out again later?" "No, we're sleeping," Ling Han answered with a grin. Shui Yenyu was about to be driven mad. "Have you begun your huge skips in logical thought process again?" Ling Han kissed her and replied, "On this first day, it is both the time when our curiosity is the strongest, as well as the time when the other side is the most guarded. I think the 5 people on the island should be guarding us. Unless we plan to completely become hostile with them immediately, we could not possibly leave tonight." "Tomorrow, then?" Shui Yenyu asked. "We'll play it by ear," Ling Han answered seriously. This valley was easy to guard, but difficult to assault. There was only a single way of entry and exit, and it was a naturally formed place of danger. Since they had already taken the initiative to enter into this trap, they definitely could not be rash or reckless. Shui Yenyu nodded. She was gradually leaning more and more towards having Ling Han make the decisions and take the lead in matters, just in case they still entered into the Black Tower. Shui Yenyu began cultivating, whereas Ling Han continued to concoct his heavenly pearl pill. He definitely had to finish concocting this alchemical pill as soon as possible. Not only would it speed up the advancement of his cultivation level, it would also bring him a high income. Cultivation was naturally inseparable from money to support it. At the beginning, it had been gold and silver, followed by origin crystals, and now it had become true origin stones, but in essence they were the same. As the night passed, Ling Han revealed a smile of satisfaction. He was getting closer and closer to success. The couple exited the Black Tower, and they walked out of their courtyard after having their breakfast. In the case of Yang Taicheng and the others, some had had a good night's sleep and appeared to be energetic and awake. Others, though, were still looking weary. It was obvious that they had not slept very well the night before. After all, those like Yang Taicheng, Fan Yong, and the others who had had a wealth of experience of journeying outside, knew the dangers of the world and would definitely not trust anyone so easily. In contrast, Jin Zhihui and the others lacked that kind of alertness in this area and slept very soundly the night before. They gathered again. Luo Wu and Fan Yong made no attempt to conceal their killing intent towards Ling Han. However, they were now freeloaders, and added with the fact that Yang Taicheng was here, they did not dare make a move on Ling Han. "Everyone, it is really a coincidence. My master just happened to come out of seclusion today and wishes to see you all." Guoxiuan walked over. Naturally, he was still riding on that puppet tiger, just as if he had no idea how to walk without that toy. However, on the other hand, puppets could be considered god tools that could awaken themselves. Since he was riding around on a puppet all day, was he also carefully guarding against them? "Hee. Then we must definitely visit Lord Island Master," they all replied, smiling. "Master is a very brilliant puppeteer, and is skilled at creating various rare and unusual objects. With Master's help, we will definitely be able to create an excellent, well-built ship which will safely allow you to leave here," Guoxiuan said. These words immediately moved their hearts. None of them had any plans of living in seclusion in the woods. With Guoxiuan leading the way, they arrived at the main hall of the manor. It was really a great hall. It was over 30 meters wide, and as tall as 15 meters, just like a palace. In the innermost part of the main hall, an old man was seated. He should be the master of Guoxiuan and his junior brothers. The old man had a very tall build. Even if he was seated, he was as tall as an ordinary man who was standing. He could practically match Xianxia's size. "I am Peiji." The old man did not stand up, and merely nodded at them. Then, smiling, he said, "I am not being rude here. I have long since lost my legs, so I cannot stand." He lifted his long robes. True enough, the part of his legs beneath the knee was gone, and thinking back on his words, they should have been chopped off by another, or perhaps some accident had happened to cause his handicap. He was not born a cripple. "It's all right, it's fine." Everyone quickly shook their heads. Peiji said, "I already know what you have gone through. I just so happen to have some materials on hand, so I will spend a few days' time to build a small ship for all of you. It will take me 5 days at minimum and 10 days at most. After I am done, I will inform you. In these few days' time, you can all take a good rest and enjoy a life of peace." "Thank you, Lord Island Master." They were all very glad. He was a puppeteer, so he would definitely have a pair of skillful hands. Peiji nodded. "If you are interested in the process of puppet construction, you may chat with my disciples. I, too, hope that this art could be developed and promoted to allow more people to learn it." When these words were said, everyone was pleasantly surprised. Puppetry and ultimate martial arts techniques were the same, and belonged to the category of secret treasures. However, Peiji was actually willing to share his knowledge. His generosity was really astonishing. Even Shui Yanyu was wavering slightly. Had she and Ling Han been overly suspicious? How could this kind of person be a villain? Peiji chatted with them for a while longer, but it was all pointless conventional talk. Soon, he expressed that he did not want to waste any more time, and wanted to begin building the ship. Everyone was naturally pleased. The faster he got started, the better it would be, so they naturally all excused themselves. "Everyone, if you are interested in the construction of puppets, you may come seek out myself and my brother disciples. We will take turns to discuss with you all, and as long as you have talent, we will definitely not keep our skill to ourselves," Guoxiuan said, smiling. Everyone was greatly interested, and indicated that they would be paying them a visit. Ling Han, on the other hand, was not greedy. He was cultivating both alchemy and martial arts, and following two paths at the same time was enough to make him feel strained. What more when another art of puppetry would be tossed into the mix? Moreover, he was a firm believer in his own strength. No matter how strong puppets were, they were still external objects, unlike alchemy, wherein the alchemical pills he concocted could at least be used to strengthen himself. Shui Yanyu, though, wanted to take a look and see if she had talent in this area. However, she was soon dissuaded by Ling Han. He had not dismissed his worries just because of this, so to avoid any accidents, it was best if the two of them did not separate. He pulled Shui Yanyu with him out of the manor. By now, they would not have any reason to keep detaining him in the manor, right? Brother Ling and Miss Shui wished to go out? When they came to the doors of the manor, they saw Bu Zhengyun approach them, riding on a black ape. That made Ling Han even begin to suspect whether these people lost their legs as well, just like Peiji. Otherwise, why would they be riding on puppets all day long? "That's right. We're going out for a walk since it's so rare to see such beautiful scenery," Ling Han answered, smiling. "Hehe. Then let me accompany you both." Whether Ling Han and Shui Yanyu were willing or otherwise, Bu Zhengyun was obviously determined to go with them. In his words, as the host, he naturally had the duty to accompany his guests and introduce the surroundings to them. He accompanied Ling Han and Shui Yanyu. Wherever they walked to, he would be close behind. He could be considered very cordial, but could also be considered to be monitoring them closely. Initially, Ling Han had been planning to go and look around the various houses in the village. But the moment he left the main road, Bu Zhengyun would speak up to stop him from progressing further. He would stop them from going over by providing the excuse that the people here did not like being disturbed, and even forbade the couple from talking with the passers-by they saw on the streets. His attempt to conceal things only made it more conspicuous, and caused Ling Han to be even more suspicious. However, because he had no plans to have a complete falling out with the forces of the Island Master, Ling Han did not take any drastic actions. After taking a simple tour around outside, he returned to the manor. Luo Wu and Fan Yong had both gone to seek out Guoxiuan to learn the art of puppetry. What if they really had talent in this area? If they returned to the imperial capital after learning this art, their status would definitely advance to another level. One would be able to obtain an influential position in his clan, whereas the other would no longer have to follow Zhao Luan, and could be independent, becoming qualified to establish his own faction. Hence, the two of them were very proactive. At the beginning, Lu Ying did not seem very interested, but afterwards, it seemed like she was moved, and went out constantly. In comparison, Yang Tietching's whole mind was focused on returning, and only swordsmithing existed in Jin Zhihui's eyes. Meanwhile, In Yuanxiang led a secluded life, and had always been very unsociable, whereas Fu Tian had completely no interest in areas outside of cultivation. Day after day passed. Luo Wu, Fan Yong, and Lu Ying simply did not return, as if they had become addicted to learning the art of puppetry. By the 7th day, Guoxiuan came to invite Ling Han and Shui Yanyu to look at the puppet he was close to finishing. Ling Han did not have any interest in learning puppetry, but was very curious about the uses of puppets. Hence, he agreed readily, and went to the workshop inside the manor with Shui Yanyu. There was a total of 2 workshops here, a big one and a small one. The small workshop was Pei Ji's private area, and even his 5 disciples would have to obtain special permission before they could enter, whereas the big workshop was the very place they arrived. Pei Ji taught his disciples how to build puppets here. Usually, they would practice here as well. The workshop was separated into a considerable number of rooms, and the soundproofing was excellent here. Otherwise, with the constant hammering sounds in the workshop, would the people in other rooms still be capable of thinking in peace? In puppet construction, there is much need for care and attention, from the choice of raw materials to engraving of formation patterns and the filling of true origin stones. Guoxiuan introduced as they walked. He led Ling Han and Shui Yanyu into a room which was his personal territory. It was a huge place, and there were various materials and tools laid out all around them. I have been building a human-shaped puppet these few days, and have just about reached the final stage. This time, he was finally not riding on the tiger-shaped puppet anymore, though it was still following close at his side. Merely looking at the back, it was really no different from a real tiger, but from the front, its 2 eyes were obviously too fake. 2 red gems had been inlaid in place of the eyes. They were not real eyeballs. He pointed at a human-shaped puppet, an obsessed expression appearing on his face. This puppet was completely wrapped in white bandages, so it was only clear that this was a human-shaped puppet. However, it was indistinguishable what materials it had been built from. The achievement of a puppeteer would be building a puppet that could be passed off as real. As he touched this semi-finished puppet, he looked excited. He continued, "Please feel free to admire it." He cut open the chest of the puppet. It was completely empty inside, and 12 opposing rib bones could be clearly seen. However, they were not white in color, but rather pale gold. The bones have gone through a special process, and were inlaid with a layer of godly metal. Because the raw materials of a puppet have different levels, the levels of the godly metal are also different. In the case of this puppet, it would be sufficient to use level 3 godly metal. Guoxiuan continued to explain to Ling Han and Shui Yanyu as he quickly processed the puppet. "Look, there are formation patterns engraved on each bone. This is extremely crucial. After all, this is not a living creature, and every part could only be activated by depending on the formation patterns. Furthermore, there needs to be comprehensive consideration. Otherwise, the fist could punch out, but the feet would be retreating, and this is naturally unacceptable." Guoxiuan was full of zest, and did not care whether Ling Han and Shui Yanyu understood and were interested. He was merely talking excitedly all by himself. The last step is to insert the true origin stones in order to activate the formation patterns. He brought over a dozen true origin stones, then turned to Shui Yanyu and said, "Miss Shui, would you like to personally insert the true origin stones to activate this puppet?" Shui Yanyu shook her head quickly. Though she knew that it was only a tool, with the idea that it was a human, she naturally felt that doing such a thing was very disgusting. Guoxiuan laughed. and did not attempt to persuade her any further. Instead, he said, no matter what kind of powerful existence, they would have the end and die, and no matter what kind of beautiful woman, she would have the moment when she would wilt and fade. He stuffed the true origin stones into the stomach of the puppet one by one. Then he stared at Shui Yenyu, his eyes becoming heated. Miss Shui, you are so beautiful and captivating. With that kind of appearance and that kind of figure, you should be frozen eternally and should not age. Otherwise, that would be a sin. This is unrelated to Brother Gua, I think. Ling Han interrupted. He, I forgot myself and my manners. Guoxiuan quickly apologized as he closed up the chest of the puppet. Naturally, he was not using needle and thread, but rather multiple metal rings which buckled up the chest. Upon a closer look, the other end of the metal rings penetrated into the puppet's spine. Now, please admire. He took a step back and showed a fanatical expression. This puppet suddenly snapped its eyes open. Then it swiftly stood. It seemed to be slightly dazed as it looked around. In that Earth's core cave, once every year or so, a kind of material would seep out. We call it divine mist, and by blending the divine mist into our puppet, an unexpected effect could be induced, such as Guoxiuan related from the sidelines. This puppet suddenly focused on Ling Han, its gaze no longer wandering. In the slits between the bandages, its eyes could be seen to exude the light of a fearful wolf. The human-shaped puppet released a low roar, and kicking out its legs, it suddenly charged towards Ling Han. This burst of speed was extremely swift. One of its hands stretched out, and it was visible that there were two fingers that had not been wrapped in bandages. They were like metal, and the tips of its fingers were incredibly sharp as they exuded a cold light. Ling Han was unafraid, and greeted the incoming attack with a punch. Pong! With that exchange of blows, Ling Han involuntarily took a few steps back. While that puppet merely shook slightly, its figure quickly regaining balance. It released another shrill roar, and charged towards Ling Han once more. Strength on the level of the middle stage of high extreme, or even late stage of high extreme of mountain river tier, Ling Han estimated. As the divine patterns of gravity activated, the puppet suddenly stumbled, and almost fell. Yet Ling Han frowned as well, feeling very strained. His opponent merely had the strength of the high extreme, yet caused him to feel so strained. Then there was only one reason for that, and that was because it was too heavy. The same effect of gravity taking effect on a stone and a mountain would naturally expend completely different amounts of energy. He recalled what Guoxiuan had said previously about the frame of the puppet being cast in godly metal. Its weight indeed had to be astonishing. What Ling Han did not understand was why this puppet would attack him when he obviously had not seen Guoxiuan issue any command. Hong! 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 The puppet endlessly attacked Ling Han as if it was determined to kill him. Stop! Quickly! Make it stop! Shui Yenyu shouted at Guoxiuan. She was not worried about Ling Han's safety. As long as this damn pervert could not be insta-killed, then with his recovery abilities, he was an undying existence. However, who would like being the target of attack for no reason? Guoxiuan bared his teeth in a grin, and replied, Miss Shui, I have not issued any command to attack. It is completely the will of this puppet. How could that be? Shui Yenyu asked in fury. This puppet was built by you, and if it was not by your command, why would it attack? Miss Shui, have you forgotten my earlier words? Guoxiuan was not the slightest bit angered and said, a kind of mysterious substance would seep out of the Earth's core cave, and blending it into the puppet would produce an extremely amazing effect. Like what? Shui Yenyu calmed down. Ling Han and that puppet were currently engaged in a fierce battle. For the moment, the battle would not be so easily decided. Hence, she was not anxious. Guoxiuan showed a strange smile and replied, for example, the materials would retain a part of their memories. Shui Yenyu was confused. What did retain a part of their memories mean? What relation did that have with its attacking Ling Han? Yet a thought streaked through Ling Han's head. This puppet could not pose a threat to him. Hence, he was completely capable of multitasking, fighting the puppet on one side whilst listening in on the conversation between Shui Yenyu and Guoxiuan. Could it be? His eyes turned cold, and he drew out the divine sword, striking fiercely. Shwa, 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 shwa. A few dozen strikes later, the pieces of cloth flew in all directions, and the bandages covering the puppet's face were torn apart, revealing its concealed face. It's... Shui Yenyu's eyes swept over it, and she couldn't help but show an incredibly stunned expression. No, it should be an expression of horror. Guoxiuan showed a smile similar to that of a demon, and replied, "That's right. That's right. Just as you can see, the raw materials of this puppet have retained a considerable amount of their memories. Hence, it began its attack even when it had not received any command from me. That puppet was astonishingly Luo Wu. He had disappeared for quite a number of days, and had actually been made into a puppet? Or was it that this was a puppet that was merely an imitation of Luo Wu's features? Realization suddenly dawned on Ling Han, and he said, "No wonder you did not allow us to enter into the houses of the villagers, and did not allow us to communicate with the villagers. It's because they are all puppets. Ha 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 ha." Guoxiuan laughed loudly and clapped his hands continuously. That's right, that's right. You have guessed correctly. You really deserve to be praised. After all, there are not many people like you that can understand it with just a little hint. Ling Han dodged and evaded endlessly. Luo Wu was currently attacking him fiercely. When he had been alive, his strongest thought was to kill Ling Han. Hence, after he had been made into a puppet, this had become his unerasable memory. You all are practically deranged," Shui Yenyu rebuked. Now, she was naturally aware that their earlier words were all lies, and they had no intention to prepare a ship for them to leave this island. Instead, they merely wanted to persuade them to stay here. Wrong, wrong. In truth, we only wanted to turn you into an eternal being, Guoxiuan said, smiling. Just think, how long would you be able to live? How many people would really be capable of breaking through to the sun-moon tier? At most, you would only be able to live a few 100,000 years, but in the end, wouldn't you still have to rot and decay, and return back to the earth? However, after being made into a puppet, you all would retain your current appearance eternally. Miss Shui, you are so captivating. So why don't you retain this kind of beauty eternally? He stared at Shui Yenyu, his eyes becoming fanatical. Hehe. Then why don't you make yourselves into puppets? Ling Han broke free of Luo Wu and charged towards Guoxiuan. Ang! The puppet tiger actually released a roar in rage, and the sound wave transformed into multiple circles that oscillated towards Ling Han. Ling Han's charging figure suddenly slowed down and became slower and slower. The clothes on him were forcefully torn apart by the shock wave. Pung! He was suddenly sent flying. He couldn't help but be shocked. This puppet tiger's abilities had actually reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and it could even be a being in the late stage or peak stage. Ha 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 ha. Since I have allowed you to discover the secret of this place, how could I have been unprepared? Guoxiuan laughed. However, rest assured, all of you will be made into puppets. Just the thought excites me. Having a puppet as beautiful as you, I would not complain no matter how many times I play with you every day. His last words were aimed at Shui Yenyu. Although this had revealed his dark, demented fetish, so what if they found out? The two of them were going to be turned into puppets shortly anyways. Shui Yenyu was both shamed and enraged, and rebuked. Disgusting! I promise I will restore you completely. There would not be the slightest distortion. Guoxiuan's eyes flickered with an evil light. He had completely no interest in normal beauties. Only after they were made into a cold puppet would they incite his psychotic lust. Not just him, but his master and junior brothers were all such psychos. Who? Both Luo Wu and the puppet tiger were attacking Ling Han fiercely, especially the puppet tiger. His battle prowess was as high as consummate level. Furthermore, it was not a real living creature, so it had no such thing as vital points. Its tendons and bones had all been rebuilt, so it was practically a beast-shaped weapon in itself. Ling Han activated the divine patterns of gravity, but immediately looked strained. That puppet tiger was even heavier than Luo Wu, and if he wanted the divine patterns of gravity to take effect, it'd be a massive test for Ling Han. With a soft shout from Shui Yenyu, she joined the battle with her sword in hand. Guoxiuan, meanwhile, did not make a move. Instead, he merely watched the show from the sidelines with crossed legs, apparently very confident in his creations. Out of these two people, one was in the early stage of the medium extreme, whereas the other was at the peak stage of the low extreme. In theory, just Luo Wu would be enough to suppress them. What more when there was still a puppet tiger that had battle prowess at the late stage of consummate level? He was standing by here merely because he feared that these two puppets would not be holding any punches and accidentally tear Shui Yenyu apart. Very soon, he looked surprised because he discovered that Ling Han's defenses were indeed quite frightening. He actually managed to still be standing after being on the receiving end of a combined attack of these two powerful puppets, which was inconceivable to him. Ha 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 ha. This really is a fine material gifted by the heavens. His surprise immediately turned into great elation. His physique is incredibly tough, and would be worth having level 5 or even level 6 godly metal to recast his skeleton. Though he is only in the medium extreme of Mountain River tier, I have the confidence to carve formation patterns for the Sun Moon tier on his bones. At that time, he would be a puppet of Sun Moon tier. Ha 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 ha, even Master only possesses 2 pseudo-Sun Moon tier puppets, and if I can create a Sun Moon tier puppet, I would be able to replace him and take hold of all the resources of this place. After killing this man, I will hide him, then lie and say that his body had been too severely damaged. Hence it could not be made into a puppet. As a result, I have already gotten rid of his corpse. In any case, Master and my junior brothers only care about this woman after all. When I have learnt the art of puppetry for the Sun Moon tier, and suddenly erupt, I will become the new owner of this place. Show! Exactly at that moment, Ling Han broke through the siege and charged towards him. To defeat the enemy, their chief had to be captured first. Guoxiuan didn't move, yet the puppet tiger roared as it hurriedly leaped before Ling Han. Shio, shio, shio. A ring of tiger teeth flew out, transforming into 24 daggers. Pu, piu, piu, piu. This puppet tiger had a battle prowess at the late stage of the consummate level, so even Ling Han was no match for it. 24 tiger teeth instantly pierced into his body, causing blood to gush from his wounds. Even though his physique was extraordinarily sturdy, it was still unavoidable that he would be wounded by an opponent who had a battle prowess at the consummate level. After all, there was a huge gulf between each subminor level of the immortal levels. The puppet tiger sucked in a powerful breath as it attempted to retrieve the teeth that it had spat out. In your dreams, Ling Han said with a sneer. With a thought, his divine sense wrapped around the 24 dagger-like teeth, and instantly absorbed them into the Black Tower. There was no martial intent on the teeth, so it was extremely easy for Ling Han to place them into the Black Tower. What? Guoxiuan's eyes widened in shock and surprise. How is this possible? The biggest flaw of puppets was that they didn't possess any self-awareness. Thus, it was extremely easy to place them into Spatial Spirit Tool. However, the method to mitigate this flaw was also extremely simple. That was, one could simply transform the body of the puppets into Spatial Spirit Tools as well. Indeed, only great elites at the Genesis tier could forge Spatial God Tools. But Spatial Spirit Tools? Such tools were widely available and, with a little effort, could be forged by cultivators at the Shattering Void tier. Starting from the Mountain River tier, creating a small and unstable space really couldn't be any easier. It was common sense that one spatial spirit tool couldn't absorb another. This wasn't due to storage volume, but rather due to the quality of such tools. Meanwhile, regardless of whether it was the puppet tiger or the tiger teeth that it had spat out, all of these contained an independent microspace within them. The reason for this was naturally to prevent others from absorbing them into a spatial spirit tool. But now, the 24 tiger teeth had vanished in the air. Guoxiuan racked his brains in an attempt to make sense of the situation, yet due to his limited cultivation level and knowledge, how could he ever suspect that it was a spatial god tool? Thus, he could only wallow in his shock and disbelief. Ong! The puppet tiger roared angrily and swiped its paws at Ling Han as it ferociously lunged toward him. Ling Han also came to a sudden realization. It could be said that the Black Tower was a natural nemesis of puppets. As puppets didn't have any will or martial intent, he would be able to absorb them into the Black Tower simply by wrapping his divine sense around them. Ha! This is wonderful. He gazed at the puppet tiger, even clasping his hands behind his back as he did so. His air of arrogance was already soaring through the heavens. Meanwhile, however, his divine sense was already expanding toward the puppet tiger like a net. The speed of the puppet tiger's lunge was incredible, and any other cultivator at the medium extreme would definitely be ripped to shreds before they could even wrap their divine sense around the puppet tiger's body. After all, there was a gulf of 2 minor levels between them. Moreover, even if they were able to wrap the puppet tiger with their divine sense, it was very likely that it would be able to rip through it. However, the strength of Ling Han's divine sense was far above his cultivation level, and it had even more so become tremendously tough after being tempered by the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. "You're seeking death," Guoxiuan screeched. He pointed at the puppet and said, "Kill that person. Still, be careful not to obliterate his body. Otherwise, it'll be a pain to piece it back together." The puppet tiger lunged over. Shwa! Vanished. Pooh! Guoxiuan was so shocked that his eyes almost popped out of his head. His mouth gaped open, and even his tongue was shuddering slightly. It disappeared. It was a puppet at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and it disappeared soundlessly just like that. I'm not dreaming, am I? Show! At this moment, Luo Wu pushed Shui Yenyu back with a punch and charged toward Ling Han. Although he had received a command to kill both Ling Han and Shui Yenyu, his memories from his previous life still affected him, causing him to harbor a stronger hostility toward Ling Han. Thus, he was determined to kill Ling Han before he killed Shui Yenyu. "Retreat! Retreat!" Guoxiuan shouted frantically. He had already become aware of Ling Han's uncanny abilities. Ling Han turned his head around to glance at Luo Wu. He had always planned to kill Luo Wu, yet Luo Wu's fate right now was probably even worse than a simple death. He had already died, yet he was still being commanded around like a dog. Ling Han shook his head. Such a person didn't deserve his sympathy. He was merely sighing about fate. Luo Wu was only a puppet right now, so of course his decision-making couldn't compare to that of a real person. Although Guoxiuan had issued a command, Luo Wu had already launched an attack. Thus, he would naturally have to complete this attack before retreating. Show! Luo Wu also vanished. Ling Han turned around to smile at Guoxiuan and said, "There's only you and me left now." Guoxiuan trembled in fright. Generally speaking, alchemists, formation cultivators, and weaponsmiths all had a common flaw. That was, their battle prowess wasn't high. It would be already quite excellent if their battle prowess was equivalent to their cultivation, while it would be almost impossible for them to possess a battle prowess that exceeded their rank. The reason for this was simple. They spent most of their time and effort on areas other than martial arts, so how could they increase their battle prowess? If this were not the case, it would be far too unfair to others. Guoxiuan was no exception to this trend. However, he was a puppeteer, and he had been protected by 2 puppets just then. Moreover, the puppet tiger had possessed a battle prowess at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. That being the case, what did it matter whether his own battle prowess was powerful or not? The puppets were the root of his confidence. Now, however, both of his puppets had vanished mysteriously and without as much as a peep. This baffled him and also terrified him. In addition, his cultivation level was only at the late stage of the medium extreme, so he truly didn't have any confidence in his own battle prowess. More importantly, the soundproofing ability of this room was far too good. No one would hear his cries for help even if he screamed at the top of his lungs. His only hope was to escape from this place. "I'll make a run for it." He wasn't good at hiding his intentions, and his eyes drifted toward the door as this thought flashed through his mind. He immediately made a dash for the door, hoping he could escape and call reinforcements. Now that it had come to this, his initial thoughts of hiding Ling Han and refining him into a puppet of the Sun Moon tier had naturally disappeared as well. He would consider these matters after escaping from here. To his surprise, Ling Han didn't pursue him. "Excellent!" he exclaimed in his mind. A delighted smile stretched across his face as he drew closer and closer to the door. "Show!" A cold glint shot over. "Ah!" Guoxiuan shrieked in pain as he viciously face-planted into the floor. He turned around only to see that there was a wound on his leg. He had no idea what it was caused by, yet it was clear that several meridians and tendons in his thigh had been snapped. This damage was naturally caused by the annihilating Dragonstar arrow, an attack that was as quick as light. Guoxiuan forcefully endured the agonizing pain as he frantically crawled up and limped toward the door. There was only one thought racing through his mind right now, and that was to escape. "I overestimated you." Ling Han leaped over and extended his hand toward Guoxiuan's head. "Don't come over," Guoxiuan screeched. He swatted his hands toward Ling Han. His battle prowess was only SOSO. In fact, it was slightly lower than his cultivation level. Ling Han shook his head. Guoxiuan's counterattacks and struggles were completely useless in the face of his overwhelming power, and he was able to capture him with a single move. "Come, tell me about your legless master." He hadn't planned to become enemies with Pei Ji before. However, it was inevitable that they would end up battling each other now that Pei Ji's disciple had already revealed his true nature. Thus, Ling Han had to seize this opportunity to learn about his opponent's abilities. "Why you can't kill me? Otherwise, my master will never forgive you," Guoxiuan said shakily. Ling Han shook his head and said, "I thought that someone as freakish and ruthless as you would also be ruthless toward themselves. How are you so cowardly?" Ling Han threw Luo Wu's corpse aside. It was genuinely a corpse now, as the true origin stones inside had already been extracted and the formations carved into it destroyed. Apart from its bones being relatively sturdy, this corpse had little difference from other ordinary corpses. "You created this puppet, am I correct?" Ling Han pointed at the corpse and continued, "You were ruthless enough to dig the organs out from others, yet you're afraid of suffering a similar fate?" Guoxiuan shuddered in fright and frantically explained, It's different. That's only a piece of raw material, not a human." Ling Han was slightly astonished. Guoxiuan's outlook on life was already completely twisted. He was clearly a coward, yet he was somehow able to commit such disgusting atrocities. Ling Han slapped him across the face and said, "I don't want to read your disgusting memory, so answer my questions." Shui Yanyu walked over and placed her sword on Guoxiuan's neck. "What's the point of speaking with such people? They're better off dead." "No, no." Guoxiuan was extremely terrified. "Don't kill me, don't kill me. I'll tell you everything that you want to know. Please don't kill me." The sound of pissing could be heard as Guoxiuan shrieked in terror. He had wet himself in fright. Shui Yanyu hurriedly pinched her nose as she retreated into the distance. Ling Han also wanted to give him a good hard kick. There truly weren't many people who were as cowardly as him. "Tell me everything you know," he said coldly. Guoxiuan nodded vigorously and said, As you wish, as you wish. I'll speak. I'll tell you everything." He started to tell a story. He had already become Pei Ji's disciple over 30,000 years ago. At that time, he was only 6 or 7 years old. Perhaps he was 2 years older than that, or perhaps he was 2 years younger than that. It was too long ago, so his memory of that time had already become hazy. In these 30,000 years, he had learned martial arts and puppet making from Pei Ji. During that time, Pei Ji had also taken in 4 more disciples. Guoxiuan had initially been unaware of how he had become Pei Ji's disciple, yet he saw a shadow of himself on his 4 junior brothers' bodies. Although this island was isolated, the sea was no stranger to all kinds of unforeseen circumstances. There were tsunamis and there were pirates, and in the decades and centuries that passed, people would occasionally drift over to this island. However, none of them could escape the fate of being refined into a puppet by Pei Ji. Sometimes, there were children among those who arrived, and Pei Ji would choose a few talented ones to become his disciples. If he later discovered that there was no value in raising them, he would kill them without mercy. Thus, Guoshoan deduced that he himself was also the descendant of someone who had drifted here. His parents had been killed by Peiji, yet due to his relatively good talent, he was spared by Peiji and even taken in as a disciple. He had been too young at that time, so he was unable to remember any of these events. Or perhaps he had been traumatized so much that these memories were suppressed in some hidden corner of his brain. However, even if he knew the truth, he still didn't dare develop any shred of hatred toward Peiji. After all, Peiji had 2 pseudo-sun moon-tier puppets. Even if he and the other 4 disciples were to team up, they would still be easily insta-killed by these 2 puppets. Peiji was an outstanding puppeteer, yet it seemed like he had experienced some dramatic event that made him uninterested in developing his talents. Instead, he chose to become a tyrant on this island, someone who brought nightmares to those who drifted to this place. As for Peiji's background and history, Guoshoan knew absolutely nothing. He merely knew that the colossal pit was extremely mysterious. A peculiar mist-like matter would drift out from it every year, and if it was fused into a puppet's body, it would cause the puppet to become much stronger than before. Moreover, creating a puppet usually took several months. Yet with the help of the divine mist, this time would be compressed into a mere few days. Divine mist! Ling Han's interest was piqued, and he said, "Where is it? Show me." Guoshoan trembled nervously as he crawled up and opened a drawer. He retrieved a jade vial and said, "The divine mist is enclosed in here." He lowered his head to hide the viciousness that was flashing across his eyes. This divine mist was extremely helpful in creating puppets, but it would corrode one's divine sense if they were to directly inhale it. It would transform one into a puppet-like tool whose only aim was to kill. The only difference was that they wouldn't listen to commands. Once he dealt with Ling Han, Guoshoan wouldn't be afraid of the remaining woman in the least. Ling Han accepted the vial, but didn't immediately open it up. Instead, he tossed Guoshoan into the Black Tower, and then entered with Shui Yenyu. He was about to examine an unknown substance, so it was naturally the safest to do so in the Black Tower. Small tower, can you determine what this is? Ling Han tossed the jade vial into the air. Pa! With a thought, the jade vial instantly exploded into pieces. A wisp of black mist instantly streaked into the air and shifted into all kinds of forms. It transformed into the shape of a beast, then a bird, and then a human who had a single horn on their head and a tail extending from their rear. Small Tower appeared, and exclaimed in unison with Ling Han, "Demonic Qi!" This was definitely demonic Qi. Ling Han had seen this substance in the lower realm before. Although there was only a wisp of it, it was far more powerful than the aura of the Azura Demon Emperor. That's right. A thought flashed through Ling Han's mind, and the Azura Demon Emperor was immediately brought before him. This demon had been confined in the Black Tower this entire time. My respects to Master. Master's fortune is shared with heaven, and Master's lifespan is eternal and boundless. The Azura Demon Emperor was extremely obsequious, and his behavior was completely typical of a base person. He glanced at Shui Yenyu, and instantly dropped down on his knees. My respects to Master's wife. Master has such refined taste. Master's wife is as beautiful as a celestial maiden, and her aura is brimming with nobility and elegance. She's definitely a beauty who only appears once every hundreds of millions of years. Shui Yenyu was completely dumbstruck. How can there be such an obsequious person? Does he have no face? Ling Han humphed and said, "Enough with the nonsense. Hurry up and check this demonic Qi out. Tell me about its origin." As you wish, as you wish." The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly nodded and bowed before turning his gaze to the wisp of demonic Qi. His smoke-like body involuntarily quaked, and he stuttered, This is a wisp of demonic Qi from a demon master." Demon master? Ling Han glared at him and said, "Explain more clearly." The Azura Demon Emperor was completely void of any temper now, and he immediately started to nod and bow again. In the immortal realm, those who have reached the Genesis tier are referred to as saints. In the netherworld, however, those who have reached the Genesis tier are referred to as demon masters. Shui Yenyu was astonished by the sight of the Azura Demon Emperor, and she interjected, "This is a demon from the netherworld?" "This lowly demon is indeed from the netherworld." As expected, the eyes of Master's wife radiate with a brilliance that sees through all of my thoughts. The Azura Demon Emperor flattered Shui Yenyu relentlessly. Ling Han was astounded by the revelation. This wisp of aura was left by a demon master whose rank is equivalent to the Genesis tier? Hang on. Wasn't there a suppressed passageway in the flame cave of the Heavenly Sea Mystery Realm? And wasn't there a being who referred to itself as Demon Master Genie trying to break through the passageway and enter this realm? Gasp! He had actually quarreled with a great elite at the Genesis tier. The beauty of Master's wife is like the sun in the sky that blinds one with its dazzling radiance. The aura of Master's wife is like the brilliant moon whose chastity makes one drop their head in shame. The Azura Demon Emperor knew no shame as he continued to praise and flatter Shui Yenyu. However, at some point in time, he suddenly lunged toward the wisp of demonic chi in the air. Ha 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 ha! Once I fuse with this wisp of demonic chi, my power will soar rapidly, and I'll recover a battle prowess of the mountain river tier. Killing you two will be as easy as slaughtering defenseless chickens. The Azura Demon Emperor laughed excitedly as it neared the wisp of demonic chi. The Azura Demon Emperor was a coward who was extremely afraid of death. In order to stay alive, he had even kneeled down to lick the feet of Ling Han, who had only been at the heaven tier at that time. However, as the saying went, a great being knew when to yield and when not to yield. The Azura Demon Emperor had yielded for so long because he was waiting for a chance to rise up. And now, his chance had finally come. His battle prowess had fallen dramatically after he traveled through the barrier between the two realms and forcefully entered the small world. His battle prowess had fallen to 15 stars of the Shattering Void tier, and he knew that he was no match for a freak like Ling Han. However, his battle prowess would instantly soar back to the low extreme of the Mountain River tier if he were able to absorb this wisp of demonic chi. So what if Ling Han was supremely talented and freakish? Would he be able to defend against the power of an immortal-level cultivator? There was absolutely no way. There was a look of intoxication on the Azura Demon Emperor's face as he arrived before the wisp of demonic chi. He would receive tremendous benefits if he were able to absorb this wisp of Demon Master-level demon chi, as there was a shred of a Demon Master's comprehension contained within it. To beings of the immortal realm, this wisp of aura was no different from a fatal poison. To beings of the netherworld, however, this wisp of aura was a supreme tonic. Moreover, it was actually a good thing that there was only a wisp of this aura. Otherwise, if there were more, the Azura Demon Emperor wouldn't dare absorb it. If he absorbed too much, he would definitely be crushed by the overwhelming power contained within it. After all, the Genesis tier was far too powerful. I'm only an inch away. Half an inch. Huh? Why can't I advance any further? The Azura Demon Emperor turned around in shock, only to find that he was already firmly gripped in Ling Han's hand. He was unable to move forward even a single millimeter. Ling Han smiled and said, "Not bad. Your courage has grown quite a lot. Master, you jest." The Azura Demon Emperor was a mist-like being who didn't have a physical body, and he immediately elongated his body to grab onto Ling Han's thigh. I was merely overcome by a rush of stupid impulsiveness. Master, just pretend that I was spewing shit. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "You really want to absorb this wisp of demonic chi? I beg for your bestowal, Master." There was an obsequious smile plastered to the Azura Demon Emperor's face as he spoke. Ling Han, don't fall for his tricks, Shui Yenyu warned. This Demon Emperor was far too two-faced. The Azura Demon Emperor's heart jolted when he heard this. Ling Han seemed like he were about to grant his wish, yet Shui Yenyu's warning would potentially change his mind. "Fine, I'll bestow this demonic chi unto you," Ling Han said with a smile. The demonic chi was merely a poisonous substance to him, so it held little value. He released his grip on the Azura Demon Emperor. The Azura Demon Emperor was overcome with exuberance, and he immediately opened his mouth and swallowed the wisp of demonic chi. Boom! His body expanded like a balloon, yet he quickly shrunk back down again, returning to his normal size. He didn't appear any different. yet they could clearly sense that the Azura Demon Emperor's aura was rising rapidly. He broke through to the immortal level in the blink of an eye, releasing a vast and profound aura. Peak stage of the low extreme of the mountain river tier. Ha 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 ha! The Azura Demon Emperor immediately started to roar with laughter. There was a smug look on his face, and he said, Ling Han, oh Ling Han, you truly are stupid beyond belief. You actually allowed me to regain my strength. Today, I'll show you what immortal level power truly looks like. Shui Yanyu was transfixed with astonishment. She wasn't astonished by the Azura Demon Emperor's power, but rather by the shamelessness that he displayed. His attitude toward them had flipped faster than one could flip the page of a book. He had still been calling them master and master's wife just a moment ago, yet he was suddenly so arrogant and smug right now. Did he know no shame? Ling Han smiled calmly and said, Your strength has recovered to the peak stage of the low extreme of the mountain river tier? Huh? How do you know? The Azura Demon Emperor was slightly surprised. It was only normal that Ling Han knew that he had reached the immortal level. However, him being able to determine his cultivation level appeared extremely uncanny. An ominous feeling welled up in his heart. Ling Han sighed and said, Little Azura, how many years have you been in here for? You have no right to refer to me as Little Azura. I'm the Azura Demon Emperor. The Azura Demon Emperor replied angrily. He had only bowed down to Ling Han because great beings all knew when to yield and when not to yield. Did they think that he was truly shameless and cowardly? Of course he wasn't. Ling Han continued. You've been in here for so long that you've already turned stupid. Did you really believe that my strength wouldn't advance after so many years? Why you? The Azura Demon Emperor's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. This brat was a freak who couldn't be underestimated. Ling Han smiled faintly and unleashed his aura. An aura that was far more powerful than the Azura Demon Emperor's aura instantly swept through the air. Master! The Azura Demon Emperor immediately threw himself to Ling Han's feet and grabbed onto his leg. He nudged his head against Ling Han's leg and said, This underling missed you immensely. Not seeing you for one day felt like being apart for 3 full years. Shui Yanyu grimaced in speechlessness. Weren't you pretty aggressive just then? Ling Han asked casually. I was experiencing a bout of schizophrenia just then. The Azura Demon Emperor suddenly became serious and said, I'm sure you're aware of it, Master. But when someone is locked up for too long, they'll slowly go insane and even develop personality disorders. That was exactly what happened to me. However, please be at ease, Master. This underling has already destroyed the other personalities. From now on, this underling will be your most loyal dog. If you tell me to walk east, I definitely won't walk west. Ling Han gazed at him and said, I've already given you 2 chances. If the Azura Demon Emperor could sweat, he would definitely be drenched in cold sweat right now. Anyhow, he still wiped his forehead out of habit. After all, he had resided in a human's body for a long time and was already accustomed to such an action. Rest assured, Master, I definitely won't disobey you for a 3rd time, the Azura Demon Emperor vowed. This time, he had genuinely been terrified by Ling Han. Only a few years had passed, yet Ling Han had already advanced into the immortal level from the heaven tier. Moreover, he had done more than just advance into the mountain river tier. He had already reached the medium extreme of the mountain river tier. If he continued at this rate, he would be able to reach the Genesis tier in a few thousand years, or perhaps only a few centuries. There would be no harm in following such a master. In fact, there would instead be an abundance of opportunities. The Azura Demon Emperor definitely had a pragmatic personality. He instantly came to a decision in his mind. He was willing to be an underling, an obedient dog, as long as Ling Han could maintain his rate of growth. He knew that even if he were a dog, he would still be an extremely noble and powerful dog. Even those that were several times more powerful than him would have to show him utmost respect. Ling Han nodded and said, This is your last chance. There will be no 3rd time. Thank you for your kindness, Master. Thank you for your kindness. The Azura Demon Emperor was overcome with delight. Ling Han planned to completely subjugate the Azura Demon Emperor, as the unique attributes that he possessed were actually quite useful. For example, he could enter and control the body of a puppet. "I'll hand this puppet to you. Enter its body, and fight for me in the future." Ling Han retrieved the puppet tiger. The Azura Demon Emperor didn't care in the least whether he entered the body of a human or the body of a dog. He immediately heeded Ling Han's command and entered the puppet tiger. The puppet tiger instantly started to move. Master, this puppet is at the consummate level," he exclaimed in excitement. One had to realize that, at his peak, he only had a cultivation level at the medium extreme. He was still a long way off from reaching the consummate level. "Are you not satisfied?" "I'm satisfied. Very satisfied. As satisfied can be." The Azura Demon Emperor was shaking with excitement. Ling Han nodded and said, "As long as you remain honest and do my bidding, I can even give you puppets at the Sun-Moon tier and Heavenly Body tier in the future. In fact, finding Genesis tier demonic chi for you to absorb isn't out of the question, either." "Master, you're too kind. I'm willing to be your dog and slave." The Azura Demon Emperor drifted out of the puppet tiger and latched onto Ling Han's leg again. This time, he didn't dare to oppose Ling Han, even though he had received a powerful puppet that was at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier. After all, this was a puppet that had been captured by Ling Han. Gasp! "Master is so powerful. He's even able to crush beings at the consummate level." Ling Han grabbed Guoxiuan. He was still unconscious after being knocked out by Ling Han's 7-kill subduing soul technique previously. This secret technique was naturally more deadly to those of a lower cultivation level. In fact, cultivators at the low extreme could be easily killed by it. Guoxiuan's eyes shot open as he was slapped awake. However, he was completely stupefied by what he saw. "Where is this? How long was I unconscious for us to have reached some unfamiliar place so far away from the island? Why you? You?" He was almost scared to death upon seeing Ling Han, as the latter was completely unharmed. Did he not open the jade vial? "No. I can clearly see the fragments of the jade vial in the distance, so he definitely opened it." "Are you disappointed?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Tell me, why should I not kill you?" I'm also a victim. I was forced into doing this," Guoxiuan said in a shaky voice. He pushed all of the blame onto Pei Ji. Ling Han shook his head and said, "Perhaps you were forced to in the beginning. However, I don't see a shred of remorse in your eyes right now. You're no different from Pei Ji anymore. Little Azura, kill him." The Azura Demon Emperor immediately entered the puppet tiger and raised its tiger head, and said, "As you command, Master." Guoxiuan was both shocked and confused. This puppet tiger had been created by him, and he had also used it as his steed for a long time. Could be said that he knew it through and through. However, this puppet tiger actually opened its mouth to speak just then. This almost frightened him to death. Ever since he remembered, he had never set foot outside this island, so it was only normal that he wasn't aware of the matters regarding the netherworld. As such, he found this situation completely unfathomable. You're also a puppeteer." He was convinced that he had figured out the truth. Ling Han was definitely a puppeteer who was numerous times more skilled than him, thus allowing him to easily capture his puppet and even give it the ability to speak. His supreme skills made the puppet tiger extremely lively, as if it were truly sentient and intelligent. The Azura Demon Emperor leaped over and snapped its jaws shut, crushing Guoxiuan's neck with a single bite. Guoxiuan's divine sense was also obliterated by this overwhelming attack, and the life drained from him in the blink of an eye. "Stay by my side and don't attack without my command," Ling Han said. The Azura Demon Emperor was overcome with joy. "Is Master planning to let me out? I'm so touched." Ling Han waved his hand, and the 2 people and 1 tiger immediately appeared in the workshop. "This is the Immortal Realm," the Azura Demon Emperor said in astonishment. Although he had already guessed that Ling Han had arrived in the Immortal Realm after learning that his cultivation level was at the medium extreme of the Mountain River tier, he was still astonished when he experienced the completely different regulations of heaven and earth and the rich spiritual chi for himself. Only a few years had passed, yet Ling Han had already advanced into the immortal level. Moreover, he could even take out a puppet at the consummate level of the mountain river tier with a casual wave of his hand. This astonished him immensely. "Lead the way," Ling Han commanded. The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly nodded and said, "As you wish, master." Now was the time for him to perform. He had to show his master just how loyal he was. He immediately opened the door and exited the workshop. "Search every single room," Ling Han said. Pong! The Azura Demon Emperor rammed open the door of the neighboring room. However, apart from piles of tools and materials, there was only an empty platform in the middle of the room. There wasn't anyone there. They left the room, and the Azura Demon Emperor rammed open the door of another room. "Ugh!" A distressed expression appeared on Shui Yenyu's face. She immediately turned around and started to vomit. The layout of this room was identical to that of the previous two rooms, with piles of tools and materials sitting everywhere. There was also a platform in the middle of this room, yet unlike the other two rooms, there was a corpse that had been cut into 8 pieces resting on top of it. It was Fan Yong. He hadn't been refined into a puppet yet, and thus his expression of terror from before his death was still frozen onto his face. The sight was enough to send shivers through one's body. In fact, Ling Han held a suspicion that Fan Yong had still been alive when he had been cut into 8 pieces. How could one not be petrified as they watched their body being dissected, their organs being dug out, and their blood flowing out drop by drop? It was no surprise that the expression on his face was so twisted. "This bunch of monsters," Shui Yenyu said angrily. Ling Han unleashed his divine patterns of flame and burned Fan Yong's corpse into ashes. Although there was strong animosity between them, Fan Yong's crimes also disappeared along with his death. Next room, the Azura Demon Emperor obediently led the way. He knew that his master was in an extremely bad mood right now, with even his tone being icy cold as if it had seeped out from an ice cave. Meanwhile, he found these sights to be extremely normal and unsurprising. Wasn't it just a dismembered corpse? The netherworld had tons of things that were hundreds or even thousands of times crueler and bloodier than this. Pong! He rammed his way into the 4th room. There was a living person. How did you people enter? Huh? Isn't this senior brother's puppet tiger? Why is it with you guys? The person in the room was Tong Yulong, and he was currently busy with making his puppet. He had only turned around because he had heard a disturbance. A female body that was being processed lay on the platform that was already painted red with blood. Her slender legs and arms had already been severed from her torso, and her abdomen had also been sliced open. Tong Yulong was in the process of digging out her organs. This female was none other than Lu Ying. To their surprise, she still hadn't drawn her last breath yet. Her eyes slowly focused on Ling Han, and her lips trembled a little. However, she was unable to make a single sound. This didn't matter, though, as Ling Han could guess what she wanted to say. "Kill the monsters on this island. Also, kill her and free her from this world of pain." "Kill him," Ling Han commanded coldly. The Azura Demon Emperor immediately lunged toward Tong Yulong. Roar! A puppet wolf appeared and blocked the Azura Demon Emperor's advance. This puppet was also at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, meaning that its battle prowess was no lower than that of the Azura Demon Emperor. Ling Han took a few steps forward and cast his divine sense out like a net. Shoo! The puppet wolf instantly disappeared from the room. Pooh! Like Guxiuan from before, Tong Yulong's eyes also bulged out in shock, his tongue hanging out in disbelief. Meanwhile, the Azura Demon Emperor had already arrived before him and swatted his paw over. Pa! His head was obliterated, and the headless corpse crashed to the ground with a loud thud. Ling Han swung his sword and destroyed the remnants of Lu Ying's life force. Lu Ying gave him a grateful look as she shut her eyes one final time. Then, Ling Han waved his hand and burned Lu Ying's corpse to ashes. They entered the 5th room and discovered another victim. Yang Taiching. This sturdy man had also been dismembered, with each of his limbs immersed in some sort of silver liquid. Unlike Lu Ying, however, his life force had already completely vanished. He had already been dead for quite some time. He had most likely been dismembered sometime today, as Ling Han had still seen him in the morning. Ling Han only had killing intent for Luo Wu and Fan Yong, and he didn't have any good impression of Lu Ying, either. After all, she had come here to kill him. However, he harbored great respect for Yang Taiching, as the latter could push his emotions aside and firmly follow his principles. There were few people who could do this. Moreover, they had battled side by side before, and he had even entrusted his back to Yang Taiching at one time. Rest in peace, Brother Yang. I'll definitely slay those monsters to appease your spirit, Ling Han said solemnly. Then, he turned around and said, let's return to our residence. Perhaps we can still save the others. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu hurried toward the courtyard that they had been living in. Just as they left the workshop, they saw Chueda and Yin Yuanxiang walking over together. Chueda was extremely baffled when he saw Ling Han and Shui Yenyu walk over, especially since the puppet tiger was following behind them. What's going on? Weren't they meant to capture these two people? What's with this situation? What on earth happened? This doesn't make any sense at all. Die! Ling Han roared. The Azura Demon Emperor immediately charged toward Chueda. It had to be said that he was quite smart. Ling Han hadn't explicitly said whom he wanted to kill, yet the Azura Demon Emperor directly chose to target Chueda. He probably thought that, as a man, Ling Han wouldn't want him to kill a beauty like Yin Yuanxiang. Chueda's puppet bear leaped out to battle with the Azura Demon Emperor. Brother Ling, what's the meaning of this? Yin Yuanxiang asked in confusion. Oh, you can thank me later, Ling Han said calmly. Pei Ji and his 5 disciples wanted to refine all of us into puppets, and Luo Wu, Fan Yong, Lu Ying, and Brother Yang have all been killed already. What a load of bullshit, Chueda retorted. Lady Yin, don't listen to his nonsense. He's simply accusing me with no evidence at all. I invited you because I sincerely want you to witness the beauty of newly refined puppets. I would never fathom bringing harm to you. Heh! Guoshuan said the exact same thing, Ling Han said with a cold chuckle. He walked over and directly absorbed the puppet bear into the Black Tower. He didn't have the patience to argue with Chueda anymore. Chueda and Yin Yuanxiang were both astounded by Ling Han's actions. Meanwhile, the Azura Demon Emperor charged over and quickly swatted Chueda to death. Without their puppets, the battle prowess of puppeteers was truly too terrible to look at. Ling Han shook his head when saw that Yin Yuanxiang was still lost in a daze, and said, I'll explain when we gather everyone together. They hurried back to where the courtyards were located. Ning Tai and Bu Zhengyun both appeared and tried to capture Ling Han. Yet both of them were swatted to death by the Azura Demon Emperor after having their puppets easily stripped away by Ling Han. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han and the others knocked on the doors of the courtyards and called Jin Zhihui and Fu Tian out. They were still in their courtyards as they were most likely on the bottom of the list, and thus it wasn't their turn to be killed and refined yet. Meanwhile, they were also completely oblivious to what had happened around them. Ling Han recounted what they had seen just then, and the expressions of Jin Zhihui and the 2 others instantly changed drastically. I'm going to kill that old bastard, Fu Tian roared furiously. The veins on his body suddenly bulged, and the hair on his head also stood on ends as a devastating aura emanated from his body. What do you two think? Ling Han turned to look at Yin Yuanxiang and Jin Zhihui. Kill them all, Jin Zhihui said as he waved his fist. Yin Yuanxiang nodded, but remained silent. Very well. Ling Han drummed his fingers on the table and said, There's only the old man left right now. Puppeteers relied on their puppets to battle, yet he was coincidentally the most powerful nemesis of puppets. Moreover, the Azura Demon Emperor could enter and control any puppet. Thus, they would be able to turn their enemies' weapons into their weapons. So, even if Pei Ji owned 2 Pseudo-Sun Moon tier puppets, and even if he was an elite at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier himself, Ling Han was still completely unafraid of him. Instead, he was brimming with confidence. The group of 5 set out together and started to search for Pei Ji. However, they looked around for a long time, but were still unable to find him. There's still a small workshop. Pei Ji is definitely in there. Ling Han recalled Guoshuan's words, and started to head toward the small workshop. This was genuinely a small workshop. It was 9 meters by 9 meters, and its door was securely shut. Fu Tian took a deep breath before ferociously charging toward the door. Pong! He slammed into the door like a powerful meteor. The door instantly shuddered and crashed to the ground. Meanwhile, Fu Tian was also pushed back. However, he simply shook his head and quickly recovered his best condition immediately. The door sent puffs of dust billowing through the air as it crashed down, and they could vaguely see Peiji resting in the embrace of a woman in the room. There was a look of intoxication and gentleness in his eyes as he caressed the face and breast of the woman. However, the female was clearly a puppet. Although her body was extremely lifelike, there were 2 black and lifeless gems where her eyes should have been. Since you've arrived here, it means that my disciples are all dead. Peiji wasn't flustered, and had the female puppet turn him around to face Ling Han and the others. A look of contempt flashed across his face, and he scolded, "What a bunch of useless trash! Old bastard! I'm going to murder you!" Fu Tian was the first to charge over, yet the female puppet merely extended an arm toward him. It seemed as if the sky were about to collapse, and it appeared as if the hand could expand without limit. Pa! The palm struck down, and Fu Tian was instantly sent flying. Blood spurted through the air as he collapsed to the ground and fainted. He didn't die after facing that attack. Peiji was clearly a little surprised and said, "I underestimated you people. No wonder you were able to kill all of my disciples. However, since you've come here, don't dream of leaving alive." He whistled loudly, and a middle-aged man instantly walked out from some dark corner. He was also a puppet. However, the appearance of this puppet was quite harrowing, as there were sabers and swords sticking out from all over its body, making it look like an echidna. "Kill them," Peiji commanded coldly. He then turned around and buried his head into the female puppet's chest, gnawing at it greedily. "Freak," Jin Zhihui said with a grimace. Was this old man a fucking necrophile? Peiji was still lost in lust, yet he suddenly noticed that something was off. Why was it suddenly so quiet? He turned around, and he almost wet himself in shock. It disappeared. The middle-aged male puppet had vanished. It wasn't in the sky, nor was it on the ground. Where the fuck had it gone? One had to realize that it was a pseudo-sun moon tier puppet. It was just as powerful as the puppet that he was embracing. The Azura Demon Emperor charged over and roared, "Die!" He had grown quite a bit, and he knew whom to attack even without Ling Han's command. As the Emperor of Obsequiousness, his ability to read the mood was naturally top-notch. The female puppet struck her palm toward the Azura Demon Emperor. Pong! The Azura Demon Emperor was instantly sent flying, and even his tiger head had been twisted at an unnatural angle by the force of the strike. The gulf between their battle prowess was far too huge. The female puppet was at the pseudo-sun moon tier, while the puppet tiger was merely at the late stage of the consummate level. "Use this one." Ling Han casually waved his hand, retrieving the middle-aged male puppet and tossing it toward the Azura Demon Emperor. "Thank you, Master." The Azura Demon Emperor instantly transformed into a burst of demonic chi and entered the middle-aged male puppet's body. Such a powerful feeling. He waved his arms around with a smile and said, "Using a humanoid body sure is easier. What kind of monstrosity is this?" Peiji was stunned by the sight of the Azura Demon Emperor. He had handcrafted this puppet, so how was it captured by that person so easily? And why could it be controlled so easily? "You're a monstrosity. Eat your uncle's attack." The Azura Demon Emperor charged over again, though he didn't dare refer to himself as Emperor anymore. However, he still had the confidence to refer to himself other people's Uncle One. The female puppet dashed over, and the 2 pseudo-sun moon tier puppets immediately became locked in an intense battle. Peiji pressed down with his arms and jumped out from the female puppet's embrace. This puppet only knew how to battle, and there was no way that it could ensure his safety. If he was trapped between the 2 puppets, there was every possibility that he would be smashed into pieces. "Humph! Even if there's only me left, killing you people will still be a piece of cake." he sneered. To everyone's surprise, segments of metal started to extend from the stumps on his severed legs, instantly causing his body to become almost 6 meters tall. Peiji appeared extremely strange right now. He was still a normal person down to his thighs, yet from there on downward, his legs looked like the roots of some old tree. It was a complex entanglement of metal rods, and they lifted him up to become something like a giant. Ha 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 ha! Watch how this old man annihilates you all. Like a gigantic centipede, the countless metal rods started to move and carry him toward Ling Han and the others. Everyone hurriedly dispersed to avoid being knocked over by Peiji's strike. Xiao, xiao, xiao. Ling Han unleashed his annihilating Dragon Star arrow and fired several volleys of Origin Power arrows. Some of these Origin Power arrows were silver-white, some were crimson-red, and some were earthen yellow. The silver-white arrows were ordinary Origin Power arrows, while the crimson-red ones were imbued with the divine patterns of flame, and the earthen yellow ones were imbued with the divine patterns of gravity. Peiji didn't dare face these arrows head-on, so he raised his leg and formed a dense net before his body that was surprisingly able to block the Origin Power arrows. Not only was this net able to block Ling Han's Origin Power arrows, but it was even able to block the attacks from the other people as well. The difference in cultivation level between them was a bit too large. Peiji was an elite at the peak stage of the consummate level, yet what about Ling Han and the other 4 people? Fu Tian was unconscious. Yin Yuanxiang was at the late stage of the medium extreme, and her battle prowess was at the peak stage. Jin Zhihui was at the early stage of the medium extreme, and his battle prowess was also at the early stage. Shui Yanyu was at the peak stage of the low extreme, and her battle prowess was 1 star above her cultivation level. Ling Han was at the early stage of the medium extreme, and his battle prowess was 5 stars above his cultivation level, though his peak battle prowess could reach 6 stars. Even if they teamed up, they were still no match for Peiji. You brats actually dare attack me? You're all seeking death, Peiji said with a sneer. Shwa! Ling Han cast a net as his body flashed about. He had been preparing the Crimson Ground locking net this entire time, and he was finally able to fully activate it at this moment. As the net flew out, it became larger and larger. This kind of treasure was naturally able to expand and shrink a great deal. At its limit, it could even envelop a mountain, much less Peiji, who was only 6 meters tall. Peiji didn't expect this, and the small size of the workshop meant that there was no room for him to hide. Either. He was instantly enveloped by the net. What? Why did my power suddenly fall so dramatically? Shock spread across his face as his cultivation level fell to the peak stage of the high extreme. His cultivation level had fallen an entire minor level. One had to realize that, as a puppeteer, he didn't possess a powerful battle prowess to begin with. Thus, he was understandably flustered now that his cultivation level had been reduced by an entire minor level. Moreover, the net that trapped him was made out of some peculiar material that he couldn't break free from no matter what. In fact, it even affected his mobility to some degree. He frantically let out a low growl, and the female puppet immediately turned around and grabbed at the Crimson Ground locking net. The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly chased over and said, "Stupid bitch! Eat this uncle's saber!" He removed a saber that was sticking out of his body and slashed it at the female puppet. The Azura Demon Emperor was a sleazeball, and once he put down his dignity as an elite, his shamelessness truly knew no bounds. His speech would become vile and vulgar. The female puppet simply pushed a palm backward, while her other hand latched onto the Crimson Ground locking net and forcefully pulled it up. She was at the pseudo-sun moon tier, and the overwhelming strength that she possessed allowed her to lift a large portion of the net up. Meanwhile, the Azura Demon Emperor's saber slashed into her palm with a deafening clang. Everyone felt as if their eardrums were about to burst, and they were unable to hear anything else. They could only see flashes of dazzling light as the saber continued to clash against the hand. Pong! After a short while, the Azura Demon Emperor was suddenly pushed back. Although both puppets were at the pseudo-sun moon tier, it was evident that the female puppet was stronger than the male one. Pa 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 pa. The sound of uncanny footsteps traveled over, and they saw more and more puppets climb out from all kinds of nooks and crannies. These puppets came in all kinds of strange and peculiar forms. Peiji pointed through the net and said, "Ha ha ha! Kill all of those people for me." There was a strong killing intent on his face, and it was clear that he was infuriated with being forced into such a sorry state. There were hundreds of these puppets already, and still more were surging out from all over the room. According to Guoxiuwen, he had lived on this island for around 30,000 years. With this in mind, Peiji had definitely lived here even longer than that. With so much time at his disposal, how many puppets had he managed to create? These puppets could completely be viewed as an army. Although they were lacking in intelligence, they had many other advantages. They had no weak points, no sense of pain, and no fear of death. At this moment, Fu Tian also regained his consciousness, though his battle prowess had fallen dramatically due to his severe injuries. Everyone was shaking with apprehension. There were so many puppets that it was possible that they could drown them to death. Ling Han roared and charged toward the puppets. Xiao, 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 Xiao. Once he broke away from the others, he naturally became the main target of the puppets. Countless attacks streaked toward him. There were slashes from claws, explosions from sound waves, and bullets of black light. Ling Han advanced fearlessly. These puppets were mostly at the low extreme of the mountain river tier, so he didn't even need to defend against their attacks, no matter how thick and relentless they were. He simply unleashed his divine sense, causing the puppets to rapidly vanish wherever he passed. The nemesis of puppets had come. His target was the female puppet, as the Azura Demon Emperor would be freed once he captured her. When that time came, it would be extremely easy for them to suppress Peiji. "Hurry! Hurry up and get rid of this net for me!" Peiji screamed in exasperation. A dozen or so puppets grabbed onto the net and tried to pry it open. Meanwhile, Ling Han dashed forward and cast his divine sense toward the female puppet. Then, the female puppet suddenly vanished. Pooh! Peiji witnessed this sight just as he broke free from the net, and his eyes almost popped out of his head in shock and disbelief. He hadn't seen how the male puppet had vanished. Yet just then, he witnessed the full process of the female puppet being captured. Truth be told, he was still completely baffled and unable to comprehend what was happening before him. "Legless old man! Watch how this uncle slays you!" The Azura Demon Emperor roared with laughter as he charged toward Peiji. Peiji naturally knew how powerful this puppet was. In fright, he shouted, "Block him!" Meanwhile, he glared at Ling Han with hatred. This brat had incredibly uncanny abilities, and it seemed as if he were his fated nemesis. Yang Taiching, the great elite who had a battle prowess at the consummate level, had already been dealt with, so dealing with the remaining people should have been a piece of cake. They should have posed no threat at all, yet they somehow managed to pull off this unimaginable feat. Anyhow, old and experienced as he was, he knew that he couldn't lose his temper and throw his life away here. He immediately turned to flee, not forgetting to say, "Brat, if you pursue me, I can assure you that all of your companions will lose their lives." He laughed loudly as he fled into the distance. Ling Han hesitated briefly before turning back around to assist the others in destroying the puppets. Although there was a tremendous number of puppets here, the castaways had the Azura Demon Emperor, who was extremely powerful, as well as Ling Han, who was the nemesis of puppets. Thus, even though the puppets surged toward them in waves, they were easily mowed down like grass being cut. After about 30 minutes, the puppets finally stopped appearing, their numbers decreasing with each puppet that was killed. With Ling Han, the puppet nemesis, present, and with the protection of the Azura Demon Emperor, who was an elite at the Pseudo-Sun Moon tier, they were finally able to exterminate all of the puppets. Yin Yuanxiang, Fu Tian, and Jin Zhihui all sighed with emotion. Were it not for Ling Han, it was very likely that they would have all died here. Regardless of how powerful or freakish they were, how could they defeat a puppet at the Pseudo-Sun Moon tier by themselves? Yang Taiching was a prime example of this. At the mention of Yang Taiching, everyone sighed in sympathy. He was someone who could stick by his principles no matter the situation. In the world of today, such a quality was truly rare and invaluable. With the battle over and done with, Fu Tian started to treat his wounds. He had gritted his teeth and participated in the battle just then as he hadn't wanted to be a burden on everyone else. He had an extremely competitive and proud personality. "Master, should we pursue that legless old man?" the Azura Demon Emperor asked. Ling Han pondered for a moment before shaking his head and said, "Forget about it. He's the ruler of this island, and he's been here for tens of thousands of years as well. He definitely won't let us find him. But if we don't dispose of him, he'll continue to commit abhorrent crimes," Shui Yenyu said. "Then let's have a look around here to see if the old thief has left any clues," Ling Han replied. "In fact, we know nothing about that old thief. If we understand his history and personality, it will be much easier to find him." "Master is so wise," the Azura Demon Emperor said obsequiously. Ling Han glanced over and tossed a puppet bear toward him. "Enter this puppet instead." The Azura Demon Emperor was slightly confused. Wasn't his current puppet stronger? It was at the pseudo-sun moon tier, and its battle prowess was several times stronger than that of the puppet bear. However, he suddenly came to a realization after seeing the look of disgust in Ling Han's eyes. As a human, his master naturally detested refining human corpses into puppets. He didn't dare disobey Ling Han, and he immediately entered the body of the puppet bear. These puppets didn't possess any free will or life force, so entering and exiting them couldn't be any easier. Ling Han incinerated both human puppets. He had only kept them to battle Pei Ji, so now that their battle was over, it was also right for him to give the deceased a proper send-off. They started to look for clues in the small workshop. Ling Han hadn't held high hopes, yet they managed to find a diary that was kept by Pei Ji. This diary detailed the process and reason for Pei Ji's abominable hobby. So it turns out that the male and female puppets were his senior brother and senior sister. The three of them were all disciples of the same puppeteer. He secretly loved his senior sister, yet she married his senior brother. He didn't let his emotions show, yet after their master died, he poisoned the two of them before restraining and then refining them into puppets. No wonder the male puppet was stabbed full of sabers and swords. It was because Pei Ji hated him tremendously. What an absolute freak. He even refined the woman that he loved into a puppet. The diary also had a detailed description of how he had refined his senior brother and senior sister. Their insults, reprimands, fury, terror, and all kinds of other things were all carefully recorded. It was as if Pei Ji wanted to relive that experience through reading his diary. What kind of hopelessness would one experience when they're betrayed by their junior brother and refined into a puppet alive? Shui Yenyu's eyes were burning with anger as she shook her head. So, one can't simply focus on talent when taking in disciples. The most important factor is still their character. Otherwise, it's no different from raising a wolf. Ling Han also sighed with emotion, yet his words sent ripples of panic through the Azura Demon Emperor's mind. Was his master giving him a veiled warning? Wang! Right at this moment, a sword light lit up and pierced toward Ling Han's back. This strike was both quick and vicious, and it was more so completely unexpected. The battle had already ended, and there were only people they had fought alongside in this room. Who would suddenly attack Ling Han? Pooh! The sword pierced deep into Ling Han's body. Ling Han roared loudly and struck behind him. Meanwhile, the Azura Demon Emperor also came to his senses, and hurriedly let out a growl before swinging his bare paws toward the assailant. The assailant didn't have time to retrieve their sword, so they could only release it and leap back. They instantly retreated 16 or so meters before descending like a cloud and landing lightly on their feet. The assailant was none other than Yin Yuanxiang. Ling Han! Shui Yenyu shouted in shock, and immediately held Ling Han in support as tears rolled down her cheeks. The sword had run through Ling Han's body, and only the hilt was still visible on the outside. Jin Zhihui was both shocked and enraged as he glared at Yin Yuanxiang, and he roared, What are you doing?" Only Fu Tian remained sitting on the ground, yet it was clear that his muscles were already tight with tension. Ling Han simply stared at Yin Yuanxiang. In a raspy voice he said, "So the culprit on the ship was actually you? How so?" The careful expression that Yin Yuanxiang had worn this entire time suddenly changed into an expression of pride and arrogance. Not only that, but her aura also changed dramatically, instantly shooting up to the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Ling Han coughed a few times as his face grew even paler, and said, "Just before Zhou Gaoyang died, he said that the culprit wasn't him. Yin Yuanxiang had successfully stabbed Ling Han, so she was in no hurry at all. In order to stay alive, it's only natural that he would attempt to shift the blame elsewhere." Ling Han shook his head, and said, "If the culprit were him, he would have most likely only begged for forgiveness rather than try to shift the blame." Yin Yuanxiang was slightly surprised and said, "So, you started to suspect me?" "Indeed." Ling Han nodded and said, "I was thinking that since the Dark Knight Hall could send an assassin, why couldn't they send two? One in the open, and one in hiding?" Yin Yuanxiang hesitated for a moment before bursting into loud laughter. "Spot on. There's no need for me to deceive you any longer. I'm indeed an assassin from the Dark Knight Hall. However, don't even think about buying time. That sword is covered in potent poison, and even elites at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier would die if they were pierced by it." Shui Yenyu was finally overcome with shock. She was extremely confident in Ling Han's regeneration ability, yet poison was a completely different story. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "I have to thank you for admitting to this. I was only suspicious before, but I'm finally certain now." He stood up and raised his left arm slightly, and the sword that was stabbed into him instantly fell onto the ground with a clang. It turned out that the sword hadn't pierced his body at all. Rather, it had merely been held between his arm and chest. "What?" The expression on Yin Yuanxiang's pretty face changed drastically, and she said incredulously, "I clearly stabbed the sword through your heart. The location was definitely right. Unless..." She stared at Ling Han and continued, "Unless you were prepared this entire time and had already shifted the locations of your bones." A smile blossomed across Ling Han's face, and he said, "Since I was suspicious about there being another assassin from the Dark Knight Hall among us, how could I not have my guard up? But why did you suspect me?" Yin Yuanxiang couldn't fathom the reason, and she said, "I clearly used a secret technique to suppress my cultivation level. Even elites at the lower end of the Sun-Moon tier shouldn't have been able to see through my disguise, much less you." Ling Han nodded and replied, "Your disguise was indeed good. However, when we were surrounded by the puppets, you still ended up using power that far exceeded what you should have been capable of. That raised suspicion in my mind, and also caused me to become more wary of you." Yin Yuanxiang was slightly dazed upon hearing this answer. The situation had been so chaotic at that time, yet Ling Han still had the leisure to keep an eye on the entire battleground. What kind of freak was he? This couldn't be helped. Who told Ling Han's divine sense to be far, far superior compared to that of ordinary cultivators at the medium extreme? Since the simple method didn't work, I'll have to resort to the more difficult method. Yin Yuanxiang chuckled coldly, and drew another sword as a frosty and sinister aura emanated from her body. She was an elite at the consummate level. Ling Han. Shui Yenyu's fear instantly turned into delight, and she couldn't help but tightly embrace Ling Han from behind. She had truly been scared to death just then. Jin Zhihui also breathed a sigh of relief, yet his eyes were burning with extreme fury as he glowered at Yin Yuanxiang. Generally speaking, betrayal was what people detested the most. They had gone through thick and thin together, battling the demonic snakes, defending against the pirate attack, and exterminating the puppets on this island. It could be said that they had formed strong bonds of camaraderie. Yet, Yin Yuanxiang suddenly betrayed them at this moment, and it felt as if a sword had been plunged into all of their backs. "Master, let me tear this bitch to shreds," the Azura Demon Emperor offered. Ling Han nodded and said, "Fine." The Azura Demon Emperor growled and immediately lunged toward Yin Yuanxiang. He had been held captive for too long, and he had a strong desire to stretch and relax his body through battle. Anyhow, he was merely controlling the body of a puppet, so it didn't matter even if the puppet was destroyed. Ling Han had a ton of spares, and he could simply enter another puppet. He was only afraid of divine sense attacks. You're merely a piece of trash. Xianxia raised her sword and charged to attack. She was indeed really powerful, with a cultivation level at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Although she couldn't fight above her cultivation level, her battle prowess was still the strongest among everyone present. As the saying went, a tigerless mountain would be ruled by monkeys. This was exactly the case right now. If Yang Taiching were still alive, her only option would be to lie low and continue using her disguise. Pong! 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 Z. The Azura Demon Emperor continuously retreated, and in the end, slid over to Ling Han's feet. His momentum was only halted when Ling Han raised his foot and stepped on his body. Are you strong enough to defeat her, or what? Ling Han said with a chuckle. There was a bitter expression on the Azura Demon Emperor's face, and he said, Master, she's a bit too strong. The puppet bear was only at the late stage of the consummate level, and it was an entire subminor level weaker than Xianxia. As such, he had been on the back foot the entire time. Ha 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 ha. Xianxia laughed loudly and said, Who told you to pretend to be so compassionate and kind? You clearly had 2 pseudo-sun moon tier puppets, yet you destroyed them with your own hands. Hey, you had already used it once, so what's wrong with using it twice or thrice? Engage her. I'll cover you from behind. Ling Han kicked the Azura Demon Emperor, and the puppet bear instantly flew through the sky toward Xianxia. 100 Ghosts Sword Technique. Xianxia let out a soft cry, and numerous ghosts materialized in the air and swooped toward the Azura Demon Emperor as she brandished her sword. Ling Han also moved. He was currently preparing the Crimson Ground locking net, and as long as he trapped Xianxia within it, her battle prowess would immediately fall to the high extreme. At that time, it would be extremely easy to capture her. In your dreams, Xianxia's body danced around in a peculiar manner, making Ling Han unable to lock onto her. Once someone was prepared, it was extremely difficult to utilize treasures such as the Crimson Ground locking net. Is that so? Ling Han smiled faintly, and suddenly activated his 7-kill subduing soul technique. Divine sense attacks were formless and intangible, and their speed was also quick beyond belief. Generally speaking, they were impossible to dodge. One could only face such an attack head-on and duel to see whose divine sense was stronger and more resilient. Xianxia was instantly hit by the attack, causing her movements to falter and her sword to stop. However, she was someone at the peak stage of the consummate level, after all, so she was only dazed for a mere fraction of a second. There was absolutely no time for Ling Han to absorb her into the Black Tower. In fact, there wasn't even enough time for him to release the Crimson Ground locking net. However, the Azura Demon Emperor suddenly lunged over at this moment. He didn't swing his paws, instead choosing to give Xianxia a tight bear hug. He was only 1 subminor level weaker than Xianxia, so her suddenly stopping for an instant was enough time for him to take advantage of it. Master, I've caught her! The Azura Demon Emperor shouted excitedly. She was an elite at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Even when he had been at his strongest, he could still only kneel if he were to come across such a powerful being. He had never imagined that he would be able to hold his own against such an opponent. Xianxia's expression suddenly changed, and she shouted, Let go! The Azura Demon Emperor couldn't hurt her, but Ling Han was already activating the Crimson Ground locking net. She was stronger than the Azura Demon Emperor, and the puppet bear's arm was twisted at an unnatural angle as she tried to break free with all her might. It was clear that the puppet bear's bones had been snapped out of shape. If it were a normal being, they would definitely howl in pain. Moreover, how much strength could one exert if they were to suffer such unbearable pain? However, the Azura Demon Emperor didn't feel shit. He simply maintained his tight bear hug on Xianxia and tried to buy as much time for Ling Han as possible. Hua! The Crimson Ground locking net unfurled and fell down from above them. Xianxia and the Azura Demon Emperor's cultivation level instantly fell by 1 minor level. Xianxia unleashed her might, and bursts of sword chi shot out from her body and slashed at the Azura Demon Emperor. Her strength was still considerably above the Azura Demon Emperor's, so she was naturally at an advantage when battling against him. The body of the puppet bear became so mangled that it was barely recognizable. This was already thanks to the fact that the puppet bear had been tempered by secret techniques, causing its bones to become extremely sturdy. Otherwise, it would have already been torn to shreds by Yin Yuanxiang's ferocious and relentless attacks. Ling Han drew his bow and activated the ultimate arrow. When the arrow pointed at Yin Yuanxiang, she instantly felt a cold chill envelop her. She had a feeling that she would definitely die if Ling Han released this arrow. At this moment, she didn't have any time to ponder what kind of arrow technique this was, nor did she have time to mull over why it was so mighty and powerful. There was only a single thought running through her mind, and that was to break free from this net and avoid being shot by the arrow. Otherwise, death was the only thing that awaited her. "Let go of me! Let go of me!" Yin Yuanxiang's pretty face distorted in distress, and there wasn't a single shred of charisma about her anymore. She drew on all her strength and origin power, and even started to draw on her source power as she started to flee while carrying the Azura Demon Emperor and Crimson Ground locking net. Surprisingly, her speed was actually quite quick. However, regardless of how fast she was, how could she compete against the annihilating Dragon Star arrow? Shoo! The sharp arrow pierced through the air and whizzed toward Yin Yuanxiang. Pooh! The arrow sped through the net and pierced into Yin Yuanxiang's chest, sending a plume of blood spurting through the air. The arrow continued to penetrate through her body, eventually exiting through her back and piercing into the puppet bear's body. Pong! The Azura Demon Emperor couldn't help but let go under the tremendous power of the blow, causing the human and bear to finally separate. "Brat, I'm going to kill." Pong! Yin Yuanxiang was just about to shout a threat, yet her entire chest suddenly exploded. Her face was filled with shock, and as she lowered her head to look at her non-existent heart, a single thought ran through her mind. Isn't this the Dark Knight Hall's explosive assassin arrow? How laughable! As an assassin of the Dark Knight Hall, I actually died at the hands of a weapon forged by my own organization. Is this retribution? Just as she finished thinking this, her entire body fell forward, dead. The Azura Demon Emperor transformed into his misty form and said, "Master, another puppet has been destroyed." First, the puppet tiger had been destroyed, and now the puppet bear had also been destroyed. A day had yet to pass, yet he had already destroyed two extremely valuable host bodies. Ling Han casually tossed a puppet wolf toward him and said, "No worries, just change into another puppet." After that, he put the Crimson Ground locking net away. It was an extremely useful treasure, especially before he reached the consummate level of the Mountain River tier. I genuinely need to thank the Luo clan. If Luo Hongdao learned of his thoughts, he would definitely seethe with rage. How could it not be useful? Did Ling Han know how many resources the Luo clan had poured into forging this net? Search this place thoroughly, and don't leave any stone unturned. Make sure to take everything away. Ling Han needed to prepare for two scenarios. What if they couldn't find Peiji anymore? This was an island, and there were only limited resources available. Only the demonic chi seemed to be limitless, appearing once every year. However, the other resources would definitely dwindle as they were used. There was simply no way that one could use the resources as they pleased. Take, for example, the godly metal that was used to strengthen puppets. Peiji had taken these from his master, and there was only a small amount remaining right now. If they took it away, Peiji would be missing a vital ingredient for puppet making. No matter how talented he was, how could he make a puppet without the necessary materials? Even if he carried some materials on him, he would only be able to make a limited amount of puppets. He would be dreaming if he wanted to recreate the large army of puppets that he'd once owned. Some of the materials were extremely valuable, which made Ling Han extremely satisfied. This was because puppet making had some relation to forging, alchemy, formations, and so on and so forth. Thus, the materials that were used for puppet making could also be used for other purposes. Ling Han sorted the materials and found that many could be sold once he returned to the capital. He was certainly going to rake in a huge amount of true origin stones. Jin Zhihui and Fu Tian both received some materials as well, though the largest portion was obviously taken by Ling Han. The two of them had no issues with this, as Ling Han had indeed done the most. They were basically just passengers and onlookers. Strictly speaking, they even owed their lives to Ling Han. Without him, it was very likely that they would be lying in 8 pieces in some workshop right now, forced to watch as their bodies were refined into puppets. They found a few ships, though they all were quite small. In fact, they were only a little bigger than boats. However, these ships were made from the unique demonic beasts of the sea, and they were even fitted with some strange device that allowed the ships to cut through the sea at high speed. There were 5 such ships, so each of them was able to take one. The extra ship was stowed away by Ling Han. It didn't matter whether he needed it in the future or not. The space in the Black Tower was very large anyway, so he wasn't afraid of it taking up too much room. Farewell, Brother Ling. Till later. Jin Zhihui and Fu Tian both bade Ling Han farewell. They didn't plan to return to the Tyrant Axe Harbor, either. Instead, they ventured into the sea, each going their own way. Ling Han watched them disappear into the distance. Then, he turned around and smiled at Shui Yenyu, saying, "Wife, it's only you and me left on this island. Should we make a bunch of kids before returning?" Shui Yenyu punched his chest in annoyance and said, "Do you think I'm a sow? Also, are we really the only 2 people on this island?" She shot a glance at the Azura Demon Emperor. The Azura Demon Emperor was given a fright, scared that Master's wife would suddenly slay him due to embarrassment. He immediately raised a leg and started to scratch his ear as any normal wolf would. It was as if his expression were saying that he wasn't a person, merely a dog. Shui Yenyu couldn't help but giggle upon seeing his expression. She had already learned of his background, yet she was still unable to fathom how an elite at the Mountain River tier could be so extremely shameless. Ling Han chortled loudly and sent the Azura Demon Emperor back into the Black Tower. He then pulled her over and started groping her slender and shapely body. "Damn pervert! Stop it!" Shui Yenyu murmured. Her starry eyes were extremely seductive, and her hands rested on Ling Han's chest, trying to push him away, yet also unwilling to do so. "Stop what?" Ling Han kissed her jade-like neck and lightly nibbled her earlobe, causing her slender body to suddenly tighten up and her face to suddenly flush with an alluring shade of red. "This damn pervert has figured out all my weak points?" Shui Yenyu was breathing heavily as she buried her head into Ling Han's chest, and she said, "Peiji might still be on the island." Ling Han nodded in agreement. This was indeed a possibility, as this island was very large, after all. They had also been few in numbers, so they had been unable to thoroughly search the entire island. Perhaps Peiji was waiting for Ling Han and the others to leave before he returned to his workshop. Ling Han continued to grope Shui Yenyu's body as he pondered this possibility. He had already developed a habit of doing this. Shui Yenyu was slightly annoyed by this. What kind of habit is this? Why does he have to grope my chest when pondering questions? In these past few days, this damn pervert has already groped my chest for longer than I have in my entire life. We don't have time to deal with that old thief. Let's burn those courtyards down and be done with it. Ling Han finally reached a decision and said, "Let's continue to look for pirates. Now that we have our own ship, we can come and go as we please." Shui Yenyu nodded in agreement. They had killed quite a lot of pirates before, yet it had only been enough to complete a single mission. Since they had already come here, and since the mission could be completed numerous times, they might as well kill a few more pirates. They immediately sprung into action, burning the entire village and then setting off from the beach. "I wonder where that colossal pit leads to," Ling Han said. "Moreover, it even spits out a wisp of demonic chi every once in a while. We definitely have to check it out in the future and see what lies at the bottom of the pit." Shui Yenyu was also extremely curious and said, "We can't fly before reaching the heavenly body tier, so we can only come back after we break through. I wonder if elites at the heavenly body tier can fly over this expanse of sea," Ling Han mused. Shui Yenyu wasn't sure, either, as the Shui clan didn't have any elites at the heavenly body tier. As for the heavenly body tier cultivators of other clans, who had the courage to ask them? The ship was genuinely small, and it was completely unsuited for sailing over the sea, with a single wave being capable of capsizing the ship. However, this was no ordinary ship, but a ship that had been made by puppeteers. As such, there were all kinds of small trinkets on the ship that allowed it to remain extremely stable while still being extremely quick. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu were in no hurry either, as they enjoyed some lovey-dovey time with each other. They were only 15 or so centimeters away from becoming a true pair of husband and wife. Ho Yang, how long are you going to flee? A loud roar suddenly traveled over. Heh, Zhu, do you think I'm afraid of you? Another voice replied. Then why are you running away? The first voice asked. Then let's battle. This lord is also pissed off by the insect following behind me. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu exchanged a surprised glance. They raised their heads, only to see two people standing proudly as they faced off in the sky. The ability to fly. They were great elites at the heavenly body tier. No. It was more correct to say that they were at least at the heavenly body tier. Ling Han turned to Shui Yenyu and asked, "Have you ever heard of these two people before?" Shui Yenyu pondered for a moment, and an astonished expression suddenly appeared on her face. Zhu Yueyun, could he be the heavenly body tier elite from the Eternity Sky Majestic Empire? He's a lone cultivator, and although he's reached the heavenly body tier, he's never formed a force of his own. As for Ho Yang, I think he's a great elite from the Jade-Drop Majestic Empire. Why is he facing off against Zhu Yueyun in this kind of place? Sure enough, these two people were both elites at the heavenly body tier. Otherwise, huge changes would ensue if a great elite at the Eternal River tier or Genesis tier were to appear on the joint peace planet. Judging by their previous exchange, it seems like they've already skirmished for quite a while, Ling Han said. At their cultivation, there are only two possibilities that could have led to this. The first is a grudge between them, and the second is because of a treasure. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu could see the astonishment in each other's eyes as they exchanged a glance. A treasure that could trigger a fight between two elites at the heavenly body tier was definitely incredibly valuable. Humph! The regulations of heaven and earth are extremely chaotic here, so it's genuinely an optimal place to battle. Zhu Yueyun chuckled and said, Ho Yang, if you don't want to die here, then hurry and hand the item over. Ho Yang roared with laughter and said, Zhu Yueyun, are you trying to scare this lord? You and I are both at the peak stage of the low extreme, and our battle prowess is similarly at 2 stars. If we battle with our lives on the line, it's hard to say who will be killing whom. I only know that if you don't hand the item over, this will be the resting place for your corpse. Zhu Yueyun threatened in a sinister voice. Is this really necessary? Ho Yang asked. That item can't be opened anyway. Are you really willing to bet your life and tens of millions of years of cultivation on some unknown item? Zhu Yueyun flared up in rage and said, You and I discovered that item together, and we even agreed to examine it together. However, you took advantage of the moment when I wasn't paying attention and actually fled with the item. How can I swallow this anger if I don't kill you? Ho Yang chuckled and said, I didn't think that you would actually be so naive. No wonder you've spent all of your time on cultivation and been lonely this entire time. You're stupid beyond belief. Die! Zhu Yueyun roared in anger and lashed out at Ho Yang. Boom! Devastating flashes of light instantly exploded throughout the sky as bursts of overwhelming shock waves surged out from the battle. Like a giant mountain, a roaring wave that measured hundreds of meters tall crashed through the sea. Fuck! We're going to be caught up in the shock waves from their battle. Ling Han grimaced. Their luck was truly terrible. There were so many places that the two heavenly body tier elites could have battled, yet they somehow managed to choose the sky directly above them. Weren't they, two innocent bystanders, going to suffer for nothing? However, now that it had come to this, their only option was to endure. Ling Han held his sword in his hand as he stood at the bow of the ship and awaited the giant wave that was surging toward them. When the wave arrived, he gave a loud roar and ferociously slashed down, forcefully carving out a narrow gap in the wave and allowing their ship to pass. Shwa! 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 He continued to slash his sword down. This wave was far too large, and each slash that he performed could only open a gap that ran 30 meters deep. He needed to continuously slash at the wave to ensure that it didn't close in on them. The ship finally sailed through the wave, and Ling Han was so tired that he could barely raise his arms. The seawater here was extremely peculiar, with each drop being as heavy as a mountain. So, how terrifying was a surging wave? Moreover, the wave had been triggered by 2 elites at the heavenly body tier, so it naturally contained a shred of the heavenly body tier's might. It was already a minor miracle that Ling Han had been able to navigate the ship through it, and it would have been beyond comprehension if he hadn't been completely beat and exhausted. Boom! 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 Before Ling Han could even recover his breath, several new waves suddenly formed and started to surge toward them. Taking a quick glance, there were at least several hundred gigantic waves. Holy fuck! Ling Han wanted to give up and send the ship into the Black Tower. Meanwhile, he and Shui Yanyu could take cover underwater. They could resurface when the 2 elites finished their battle, then take their ship out and set off for their destination again. However, coming across a battle between 2 elites at the heavenly body tier was a rare opportunity, and watching them battle would definitely be especially beneficial to his own cultivation. Thus, Ling Han gritted his teeth and continued to endure. He continued to unleash the 10,000 techniques returned to one to slash the giant waves apart. Fortunately, his power had also increased considerably along with the elevation of his cultivation level. Thus, although the might of the 10,000 techniques returned to one was significantly reduced, its toll on him had also become much lower than before, allowing him to keep enduring. Of course, the most important factor was still his sturdy physique and astonishing stamina. Otherwise, if he'd been an ordinary cultivator at the Mountain River tier, his arms would have already become numb and limp. Ling Han persevered, and under the strong intensity of the waves, his willpower was also steeled. A burning fighting spirit raged within him, and he felt as if he could even battle against an elite at the heavenly body tier. Meanwhile, the battle in the sky became more and more intense as both elites began to unleash their true powers. Dark clouds swarmed about, blotting out the sun. Then, in the next instant, flames seared through the air and transformed it into a sea of fire, appearing as if it were about to incinerate the sky and evaporate the sea. Elites at the heavenly body tier were far too powerful. Ling Han felt as if he were a mere ant. No, he felt even worse than a mere ant. If either of the 2 people wanted to kill him, they would be able to do so with a single glance, not even needing to lift a single finger. Power! This is true power. There was a strong hunger in Ling Han's mind as excitement surged through his body. He was unable to see the battle in the sky clearly, as the 2 elites soared about and unleashed their complete strength. The sky was burning, and the sea was boiling. This place had become like hell on earth. Fortunately, the 2 elites wandered further and further away from Ling Han and Shui Yenyu's position. Otherwise, Ling Han definitely wouldn't have been able to block the devastating shock waves that were being generated by their intense battle. Boom! An extremely thick column of light suddenly shot out from the sea and soared into the sky. Such was its astounding might that it could even be seen from hundreds of kilometers away. Ho Yang chuckled and said, "Ju Weiyun, a historical site was opened by us. Why don't you head over and explore it? This lord won't compete with you." Bullshit. That site is only at the Sun-Moon tier. How can it compete with the value of that box? Ju Weiyun roared angrily. It's completely worthless. It can't be opened anyway. Then why are you keeping it? Give it to me. This lord likes this kind of strange and peculiar things. Fuck off. The 2 of them started to battle again, the intensity of their battle even greater than before. Blood sprayed from their bodies and instantly dyed the sky red, even transforming into a boundless blood rain that was brimming with terrifying killing intent. Numerous creatures in the sea became unfortunate victims, dying violently as their bodies came into contact with the blood rain. This was heavenly body tier blood, and being struck by a drop of such blood was like being struck by a heavenly body one. It was extremely terrifying. Ling Han had naturally placed Shui Yenyu and the ship into the Black Tower already, and he had also entered it himself. The surging waves carried them along, and they were submerged into the sea at times and were tossed into the air at others. The Black Tower was like a mustard seed, and even the extreme weight of the gravity fields was unable to affect it. In fact, it was resistant to all powers, and thus the regulations in this sea were completely ineffective against it. Shoo! A small dot of light suddenly fell down from the sky. Ling Han had a sharp eye, and he instantly determined that it was a white jade box, plopped into the sea and then started to sink rapidly. Is that what the two heavenly body tier elites were fighting over? Ling Han's heart thumped with excitement. He couldn't snatch something from a heavenly body tier elite, but this treasure had been knocked out of their hands now, giving him a chance to obtain it. Though, it had landed quite far away. Before Ling Han could even exit the Black Tower, Zhu Yueyun and Ho Yang had already shot down from the sky and plunged into the sea. They continued to skirmish as they chased after the white jade box, and both of them wanted to break free and move in front of the other. However, the gravity was immense here, and the jade box sunk at a tremendous speed. Ling Han lost sight of it in no time at all, and the two powerful elites also disappeared from his sight in a flash. Meanwhile, the Black Tower continued to drift along the sea, unseen and undetected by others. Ling Han's mind whirred, and he finally made a decision. He resolutely leaped out of the Black Tower. An overwhelming weight instantly bore down on him, dragging him deeper and deeper into the sea. This was exactly what he wanted. It would naturally be best if Ling Han could obtain the jade box. Even if he couldn't, he still wanted to explore the seabed where the column of light had shot out from. After learning of the Star Sea's history, Ling Han had already developed a strong interest in its seabed. With his outstanding fortune, perhaps he would be able to find some inheritance or inter-realm treasure. The two elites had said that the phenomenon caused by the column of light represented the reappearance of a sun-moon tier abode. They weren't interested, yet Ling Han was. I'll look for the jade box first, and then explore the abode. 30 meters, 300 meters, several hundred meters, Ling Han continued to sink toward the seabed. As he descended further and further, the surrounding environment also became increasingly dim. However, unlike other seas, the depths of the Star Sea were only dim, with the light still present no matter how deep he descended. This was because of the tremendous gravity fields here. They were so powerful that even the refraction of light was forced to undergo some kind of extraordinary change. Light was pulled toward the bottom of the sea, and was unable to refract back to the surface one. Meanwhile, Ling Han was also experiencing crushing pressure. The water pressure is so terrifying. There was some kind of indescribable regulation here. If one were to scoop up some seawater, they would find that there was absolutely nothing special about it. Upon entering the sea, however, one would discover that every single drop of water weighed as much as a mountain. With power at the mountain river tier, one could easily endure the weight and pressure of a few mountains. However, every drop of water in the Star Sea was like a mountain, making it an insanely terrifying prospect. Most importantly, the water pressure would increase the further one descended. At great depths, one wouldn't feel like they were being crushed by mountains anymore. Rather, they would feel as though they were being crushed by a heavenly body. If cultivators fell into the sea, they would have to activate an origin power barrier to protect themselves. Otherwise, they would be crushed into pulp in no time at all. It was no wonder that people couldn't stay in submerged the sea for too long. After all, they would be facing certain death once they expended all of their origin power. Ling Han had initially planned to descend to the bottom and spend a few years walking back to shore. After experiencing the water pressure, however, he realized just how naive his plan had been. Of course, Ling Han was no ordinary person. First of all, he had a tremendously powerful physique. At the very least, he was still able to withstand the crushing pressure at this moment. It was just that his bones were already cracking and groaning under the immense stress. Secondly, he still had the Black Tower. So, even if expended all of his origin power, he would still be able to enter the Black Tower to recover. After reaching a depth of 3,000 meters, the surroundings finally became pitch black. 3,300 meters, 3,600 meters, 3,900 meters. Ling Han continued to venture deeper and deeper. If others learned of this, their jaws would definitely drop slack open in shock. People did indeed come to this sea to search for lost treasures that lay on the seabed. However, they would normally only explore the shallower regions of the sea. The limit was set at roughly 3,000 meters. Past this depth, the region of the sea would be labeled as the deep sea. The deep sea was incredibly dangerous, and just the water pressure alone would be able to crush most mountain river tier cultivators. Moreover, there were even devastating demonic beasts at such depths, and it was nothing special to come across one at the sun-moon tier. One could lose their life at any moment. How much of their power could cultivators exert in such a harsh environment? 4,800 meters, 5,100 meters, 5,400 meters. When Ling Han reached a depth of 6,000 meters, the surroundings suddenly became brighter. This luminance was given off by the fish in the sea. To Ling Han's surprise, their scales were actually able to emit light. When they swam in schools, they would be able to illuminate the entire space around them. What a dazzling sight! 7,500 meters, 8,400 meters. After reaching this depth, Ling Han's godly bones were finally unable to withstand the overwhelming pressure, and he had to channel his origin power to push back against the pressure. However, his origin power was being drained at a rapid rate. He retrieved a true origin stone and absorbed its energy as he continued to resist the pressure. 9,000 meters. Ling Han finally reached the seabed. The seabed wasn't flat, instead looking like a hilly range that was full of rises and falls. Like the fish from before, there were numerous stones that emitted light and illuminated the sea. This was a beautiful world, and if it weren't for the crushing pressure, Ling Han would really have loved to bring Shui Yanyu out to enjoy the stunning scenery together. It was a pity that Shui Yanyu didn't have a sturdy physique like him. Moreover, she was only at the peak stage of the low extreme, meaning that she wouldn't be able to withstand the devastating pressure of the sea anyway. If she came out, she would instantly be crushed into pulp. In the distance, there was a radiant glow that could be seen clearly even from very far away. That was the sun-moon tier abode. Ling Han barely hesitated before swimming toward the column of light. As for the jade box, he could only leave that to luck. After all, the two elites at the heavenly body tier had come down before him. With their powerful abilities, they had definitely examined this area several times already. If the jade box had landed here, they would have already found it. Thus, he could only leave this to fate. Perhaps the heavens would favor him and make the jade box appear before his feet. He walked forward with great difficulty. His speed had fallen drastically after he arrived on the seabed, and if others saw him, his rigid and clumsy movements would surely elicit their laughter. He advanced slowly. If he were on the surface of the sea, he would have been able to cover this distance in a mere 10 minutes. Now, however, he had to spend almost half a day. Finally, an expanse of ruins appeared before him, one of its corners radiating with a dazzling light. This is probably a mountain gate. He could clearly tell that this place used to be a mountain. However, half of the mountain peak had already been sliced off. Meanwhile, most of the mountain had also sunken into the seabed. As a result, only a small portion of the mountain remained sitting in the water. A stone pillar that measured at least 30 meters in thickness and 300 meters in height stood at the waist of the mountain. This stone pillar was the source of the dazzling column of light. There was a cave entrance next to the stone pillar, and there was also some dim light radiating from within it. However, the light from the cave entrance appeared extremely insignificant when contrasted against the brilliant and piercing light from the stone pillar. Ling Han swam over and tried to enter the cave to explore it. However, a strong current suddenly surged over as a gigantic shark appeared before him. Rings of golden-veined patterns decorated the shark's colossal body. This was a golden pattern shark, a demonic beast at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Surprisingly, a contemptuous smile tugged at the golden patterned shark's lips as it discovered Ling Han. After reaching the mountain river tier, demonic beasts would have naturally developed intelligence already. In the shark's eyes, Ling Han was so weak that he was almost insignificant. However, the shark still swished its tail and shot toward Ling Han like an arrow, opening its mouth to bite as it did so. There was a loud snapping sound as it snapped its mouth shut. However, A confused look instantly appeared on its face. For some reason, it hadn't been able to bite into anything. The minuscule human had disappeared. The shark scanned its surroundings, yet it eventually gave up on its search. Instead, it swam toward the cave entrance. It had also been drawn here by the dazzling column of light. However, the clash between the two heavenly body-tier elites just then had caused it to almost wet itself, so it hadn't dared venture over. Only after the two auras had disappeared for a long time did it dare swim back to this place. There were several other beings that had the same mindset as the shark. Glancing around, one could see that a turtle, crab, seahorse, and octopus had also appeared in the surroundings. These demonic beasts were all of similar strength. Thus, they didn't engage in battle, instead conversing using their divine sense after facing off for a short while. They then entered the cave one by one. "Ha!" The demonic beasts all exclaimed in astonishment when they arrived inside the cave. They discovered that the cave wasn't filled with water, but was a dry space instead. "This is the abode of a great human elite," the turtle said. "No, no, no. This is most likely a mountain sect that has had most of the regions inside destroyed," the seahorse said. "Only this one place still remains. This place definitely holds rare treasures," the other demonic beasts exclaimed in unison. They all communicated with their divine senses, and thus they were able to converse directly and overcome the difficulties posed by the language barriers between them. "The treasures of humans might not be useful for us," the crab said. It was a demon-faced crab, and there was a demon-like pattern on its shell. It was in human form right now, yet its pair of huge pincers still remained in their original form. The bodies of demonic beasts were akin to god tools. This was heaven's blessing to them. Of course, they wouldn't mind owning a few more god tools, either. "Hee, you can leave if you want. I don't mind using the treasures of humans," the prawn said. It was a black armored prawn that had a pitch-black body and an extremely sturdy shell. In fact, its outer shell was as sturdy as similarly ranked godly metal. This prawn could also shapeshift into human form, with a thick layer of black armor covering its body when it did so. This armor was transformed from none other than its outer shell. This was a residence built by humans, so it was unsuitable for the demonic beasts to enter in their original form, which was relatively huge. Moreover, this wasn't a water environment, meaning that assuming human form would naturally be the most suitable. The demon-faced crab humphed and said, "There's no need for you to stick your nose into this lord's matters. Fine, fine. There are many hidden dangers here, so I say that we look for the treasures first, then decide how to divide them among us," the octopus suggested. She was the only female here, and her gray hair was plaited into dozens of braids. However, looking closely, one could see that each braid was actually a tentacle that was gently swaying about. She was a gray cloud octopus. "I agree. Let's look for the treasures first." The demonic beasts reached a consensus and started exploring the ruins. "It's been too long, and all of the valuable things have already crumbled to dust. Damn it! This is the constellation illusion grass, a level 5 godly medicine. If there were enough, I would be able to break through to the sun-moon tier. This is a peculiar radiance stone, and it can temper one's godly bones. It's a shame that it's already turned into dust. Otherwise, it could have raised my armor's defense by an entire cultivation level. Heavens! This is a 4-emperor pill." The wails and agonized cries of the demonic beasts continued to echo throughout the ruins. They were stunned by the amount and rarity of the treasures here. Yet they were also filled with a deep grief as all of these treasures had already crumbled, turning into dust. There wasn't a single item that remained in optimal condition. This treasure storage was divided into several smaller rooms, and they went through each of these rooms one by one. They arrived at the final room, and all they found there was a single stone slab. This stone appeared extremely ordinary. This was also the demonic beast's first reaction. This stone was far too ordinary, not even giving off the slightest of lusters. This was the kind of stone that wouldn't attract a second glance if it were tossed onto the ground with other stones. The problem was, would one really place such an ordinary stone inside a treasure storage? It would be hard to determine if there was nothing to compare it to. However, the treasures in the other rooms were all at the Sun-Moon tier, and only this room housed a stone that appeared extremely ordinary. How could the demonic beasts not be suspicious? "What on earth is this thing?" a demonic beast asked curiously. "How about we examine it first? There's no need for us to fight over it before we learn of its functions," the demon-faced crab suggested. Agreed. The demonic beasts all shuffled over. No one dared to attack as they had already reached a consensus. If anyone dared to make a move, they would definitely become the target for everyone else. However, this stone was truly as normal could be, even seeming extremely irregular in some places. It appeared as if it had been chipped off from a larger boulder. The demonic beasts tapped it and ran their hands over it, yet there was absolutely no reaction from the stone. However, their expressions changed drastically when they started attacking the stone. This was because attacking the stone was like attacking air, with the stone remaining firm and unmoving no matter how they attacked it. Although we're unaware of what other functions the stone has, just the fact that it can absorb attacks is already extremely shocking, the gray cloud octopus exclaimed. This stone slab wasn't just sturdy. The most astounding part was that it could actually absorb attacks. The faces of the demonic beasts were all filled with greed. Even if this stone slab had no other uses, just the fact that it could absorb attacks was already beyond extraordinary. Shwa! Several hands instantly grabbed at the stone. Now that they knew of its effect, everyone naturally wanted to obtain the stone for themselves. If they could use this stone as a shield, the strength of their defenses would definitely increase manyfold. "Move aside! It's mine!" The demonic beasts roared at each other as they fought over the stone. This was naturally a chaotic battle. Every single demonic beast was aiming for the stone slab, so they didn't have any intention of killing their opponents. However, whenever someone obtained the stone slab, they would instantly be surrounded and attacked by everyone else. Thus, even if there were demonic beasts who were slightly stronger, they still held no advantage at all in such a chaotic battle. Pong! Right at this moment, however, the golden patterned shark's body suddenly exploded. The other demonic beasts were all given a fright. What happened? No one targeted him, so how did he suddenly die? At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared and reached toward the stone slab. It was none other than Ling Han. He hadn't lingered in battle just then, and had directly entered the Black Tower instead. However, he'd been swallowed into the golden patterned shark's belly along with some seawater. Just then, he exited the Black Tower and unleashed his full strength, immediately causing the golden patterned shark to explode into pieces. So what if it was a demonic beast? Its internal organs were still extremely fragile and vulnerable. Human! Damn it! The other demonic beasts were all shocked and infuriated. Although they didn't belong to the same race and weren't especially friendly with each other, they were all sea demons, after all. Even though they'd attacked each other at times, they were definitely firm allies when it came to fighting against external enemies. Moreover, Ling Han was actually trying to snatch the stone slab. They all attacked in unison. The tentacles of the octopus, pincers of the crab, and claws of the turtle all struck at Ling Han. Ling Han was merely at the early stage of the medium extreme, so he appeared extremely insignificant in the eyes of the demonic beasts. He had somehow managed to kill the golden pattern shark just then, but such an event would definitely not happen a second time. Pong! Their attacks all slammed into Ling Han's back, and each of the 5 attacks was at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. They were confident that no one at the medium extreme could withstand such an attack. However, although Ling Han spat out a huge mouthful of blood, his speed became even quicker as he shot forward and grabbed the stone slab with his hand. What? The 5 demonic beasts were all stunned. How was this possible? This human was merely at the medium extreme, so any single one of them should have been able to blast him into pieces, much less all 5 of them together. How did he only spit out a mouthful of blood? People all said that demonic beasts had powerful physiques. However, by the looks of it now, it appeared as though this human was the true demonic beast. Ling Han landed on the ground, stumbling forward a few steps before he caught himself. Searing pain burned across his back. Although his physique was on par with level 3 godly metal, he still felt a significant amount of pain after being hit by 5 consummate-level demonic beasts. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, and then another 2 mouthfuls of blood. Only then did he feel a little better. It hurts so fucking much, Ling Han shouted in his mind. However, the stone slab was finally his now. He wouldn't be afraid of losing it even if a heavenly body tier elite came over right now. Sorry, but this stone slab is mine now. Put down the stone slab and we can spare you, the gray cloud octopus uttered coldly. Her whole head of tentacles was lightly dancing. At first, they were only about a foot long, but now they extended to about 3 meters long, just as if they were spiritual serpents. Demon-faced crab, black-armored prawn, the giant turtle, and the seahorse were all staring at Ling Han, their eyes extremely unfriendly. Although this human's physique was very amazing, it was definitely not something that could not be broken through. If that had not been the case, he would not have been throwing up blood continuously when he had been on the receiving end of their combined attacks just now. Even if that stone slab possessed the special effect of absorbing attacks, it was only about the size of a human palm. At most, it would only be capable of protecting one vital point. In terms of battle prowess, the 5 of them were at a complete advantage, and if they worked together, they would still be able to easily eliminate this human. Ling Han snickered and said, "Let's exchange a few blows first." He took the initiative to charge, brandishing his sword in an attack. Damn it! The 5 demonic beasts all flew into rage, and they shot out their respective attacks at Ling Han. Ling Han's purpose was to test out the uses of this stone slab. After all, he had hidden in the Black Tower previously, and thus had only gotten very vague information. Pung 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 pung. The attacks shot over, and Ling Han took out the stone slab to block to the right and parry on the left, instantly absorbing the various attacks. It was like a sponge soaking in water, making no sound and frighteningly quiet. He was involuntarily surprised. His physique was very tough, but after enduring an attack that exceeded the limits of his power, he would still be forced back or even be sent flying, completely unlike now when he was able to disperse even the attack from an elite cultivator at the peak stage of consummate level. This was too inconceivable. However, though the stone slab's effect was unnatural, with the combined attacks from 5 great elites, Ling Han could not possibly handle everything, and still suffered quite a number of attacks, causing him to once again throw up blood repetitively. His purpose was to test out the stone slab, and since he already knew the effects, there was naturally no further purpose to continue the battle for no reason. Ling Han was just about to enter into the Black Tower when he saw another person enter into the treasure trove. What first came into sight was the legs that looked like tree roots constructed of innumerable metal rods. Then it was an old man who had lost the lower half of his body, and it was connected atop these metal rods. Peiji. Obviously, he, too, had discovered that a pillar of light had shot skywards from here, and thought that a secret treasure had appeared. Hence, he had rushed here with all impatience. "Big Brother Pei, great! Quick! Come and help me block these people!" Ling Han called out loudly. Ling Han! Peiji couldn't help but be surprised. He had never imagined that he would see Ling Han here. Was this brat a portent of calamity for him? Why was it that he would see the latter everywhere he went? Ling Han pounced over, but at the instant he neared, he flashed right into the Black Tower. Immediately, Gray Cloud Octopus, Demon-Faced Crab, and the other great elites all turned their eyes to Peiji. "Where's the brat?" they asked icily. If that stone slab could be used appropriately, then the value it exhibited would be incredibly astonishing. Peiji was baffled. At first, he had thought Ling Han was mocking him by calling him Big Brother, but when he saw the extremely unfriendly eyes of these 5, he knew that he had been done in by Ling Han. Ling Han had diverted the disaster onto him. Damn it, exactly what utterly horrible thing had that brat done that it would implicate him as well? Ho ho, I shall not lie to you. Not only am I not friends with that damnable brat, we are enemies. I, too, want to kill him and delight in his death afterwards. Peiji took a few steps back, not daring to be the slightest bit careless. He was even more displeased internally. If it were not for the fact that his 2 pseudo-sun moon tier puppets had been snatched away by Ling Han for some inexplicable reason, He would have been able to easily suppress these 5 animals, so what need would there be for him to be as cautious as he was now? Humph! The words of humans should never be trusted, demon-faced Crab said coldly. That's right. Though this old man is already crippled, and does not have much youthful vitality, either, he is still an existence of the consummate level, after all. Devouring his blood essence would still be a little nutritious. Gray Cloud Octopus stretched out her foot-long tongue and licked her lips. Peiji was stunned, and quickly went into a defensive position. He said, "Everyone, I am not one easily to be trifled with either. If you want to kill me, at least one of you would die with me. Is that right?" The 5 demonic beasts made their moves at the same time, and attacked Peiji simultaneously. Pong! The moment they made their move, Peiji was completely at a disadvantage, and ended up being horribly thrashed by the 5 demonic beasts. His battle prowess only matched his cultivation level or was even a bit weaker than that. The majority of demonic beasts, though, could reach the standard of battle prowess they should have. A great many even possessed battle prowess that exceeded their cultivation levels by a star because of their tenacious body and unique anatomy. Hence, with only him against a large number of enemies, and furthermore being dominated in terms of battle prowess, Peiji was naturally even worse off. Pooh! He spat out blood madly. As a puppeteer, he himself was weak in actual battle. However, his strongest 2 puppets had been taken by Ling Han, so he had only had a few puppets left to cover him while he fled, but they were all in the low extreme. This kind of puppet absolutely could not dive into the deep sea, and they had long been crushed by the underwater pressure. Furthermore, he could not store them into his spatial spirit tool. Hence, he was really all by himself now. The situation now was practically disadvantageous to him to the utmost. A mere human. Just a human. The 5 demonic beasts all smirked coldly. Peiji's inability to withstand a single blow finally helped them recover their lost confidence. The brat just now was after all an exceptional case, and the majority of humans were still normal. Peiji was extremely depressed. He had not seen any treasures after rushing all the way here, and was now being targeted by the combined attacks of 5 elites. This was practically baffling and extremely depressing. That despicable brat. It was all his fault. His fault entirely. 100 flowers dancing wildly. Peiji delivered a powerful move. Innumerable metal legs bloomed like they were the petals of a flower. The power of the attack extremely shocking. What mood did he have to linger in the battle? He planned to deliver a powerful move to cut a path of blood out and flee. Whatever treasure there was, he did not want it anymore. Humph! Turtle stepped out to block his attack. His body shook, and instantly became a few times bigger, forcibly taking this attack head-on. Pong 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 pong. A series of attacks fell, but merely created brilliant sparks on that turtle's back, completely unable to break through his defenses. Turtle was the demonic beast with the strongest defenses. There was practically none that could match it. Peiji almost spat out blood. He had shot out a powerful move, yet only one the elites from the other side was enough to block it forcefully. Die! Demon-faced Crab and the other 3 immediately followed through with an attack. Schwa! Countless octopus tentacles stretched out, while giant crab pincers and prawn pincers clamped down. They were all covered with divine patterns, and flickered with divine light. Ah! Peiji released a horrible scream. Though he was defending with all his might, there were too many enemies, and they were too strong. One of his arms was instantly cut off, and over a dozen bloody holes appeared on his chest. Thankfully, his vital points had been missed. Otherwise, he would definitely have died with their single attack. The 5 great demonic beasts did not pull any punches. Another attack blasted over, intending to end Peiji's life. Apologies. This person is guilty of terrible crimes, and I must kill him personally. Ling Han appeared, the ultimate arrow already activated. The 5 great demonic beasts all felt their hair stand on ends. If they had any, this arrow made them feel a powerful threat. If they did not defend with all their might, even they would be severely injured, or possibly even instantly killed. Without waiting for them to form their second thought, Xiao, the arrow had already shot forth with all its fury. No! Peiji only managed to widen his eyes, and an arrow had shot into his chest. The tail of the arrow flashed past, and directly flew out through his back. If Peiji had still been in his prime, then even if he was unable to dodge this arrow, he would at least have been able to avoid a critical hit to his vitals. However, he had been ganged up on by 5 great demonic beasts, and had already received severe injuries, with his battle prowess taking a drastic drop. How would he have been able to avoid this arrow? He looked at his chest with slight confusion, then pointed at Ling Han and uttered, "Brat, I will definitely tear you into pie. Pa!" He had not finished saying the word pieces when his chest suddenly exploded. It was impossible for him to ever finish that final word. His expression was filled with unwillingness. He collapsed heavily onto the ground, his blood spilling all over. This treasure trove was obviously incredibly sturdy. The battle just now had not damaged it in the slightest, and now the blood of a mountain river tier cultivator was naturally unable to damage it, either. Many shadows embodiment technique, Ling Han babbled, and Xiao entered into the Black Tower. Damn it! The 4 powerful demonic beasts were all furious. They had been tricked once by Ling Han just now, and now, for some inexplicable reason, they allowed him to escape. They had really lost face here. What kind of movement technique is that? How could it be so strange? We have fallen for his trick. This old human bastard was not in the same group as that little bastard. Instead, they were enemies. Damn it, we've been used. Without us acting, that little bastard would definitely not have been able to kill that old bastard. We've been horribly tricked. The 5 demonic beasts were in a towering rage, but now that Ling Han had disappeared without a sign, what else could they do? After raging for a while, they left one by one. The extraordinary images here were incredible, and might attract even more powerful demonic beasts. By that time, their only fate would be devoured. Ling Han, too, came out of the Black Tower. He left the treasure trove and followed the crowd. He once again entered into the Black Tower to study that mysterious stone slab. Small Tower? Do you know what this is? Small Tower's figure surfaced. It lightly swayed, and replied, "This is the absolute beginning stone." Ling Han asked because he wanted to try his luck and maybe get an answer. He had not thought that Small Tower would really know it, however, so it stunned him for a moment. Then, he continued, "Tell me more details." Small Tower humphed and finally replied, "In the beginning when the heaven and earth split, it was among the most ancient stones, and is an evolution of the Chaos Source Rock." Ling Han knew of the Chaos Source Rock. Previously, when he had still been in the lower realm, he had obtained a large piece Azura Demon Emperor kept constantly. Furthermore, he had even managed to trick the latter heavily because of it. "Then it is an incredible treasure," he exclaimed, slightly excited. "Sorry, aside from the fact that it's a bit old and a bit sturdy, the absolute beginning stone does not have any special property. It is merely a material used to record history." Small Tower immediately interrupted. Ling Han was immediately disappointed. This was something he had snatched back when he fully knew he faced the risk of being heavily thrashed, and it actually could not be considered a treasure? Hold on. Ling Han immediately said, "That's not right. No power can penetrate this stone, and it can absorb all power, so how would one be able to carve words on this?" Ho, since it cannot be penetrated by any power, how could it have been shattered into pieces? Then, Small Tower countered. "This?" Ling Han nodded and said, "Even if it is the absolute beginning stone, there should be a maximum limit to the power of the attacks it can absorb. When the power has exceeded this limit, even the absolute beginning stone would only be shattered. So the child can be taught." Small Tower put on an air of maturity. However, the Black Tower had existed for who knew how many millions, or perhaps it should even be counted in billions or trillions of years, so it did indeed have the right to act mature. Though the absolute beginning stone is no treasure because its history spans very far back, it is treated by many as a plaque of greatness to sing praise of the feats their ancestors have achieved. So it could still be considered quite a rarity, Small Tower continued. Ling Han sighed and said, "Though I feel quite good about myself, I am still not so arrogant as to set up a plaque to sing praise for myself. I'll just use this thing as a shield. Oh, right, what kind of power could break it? Power of the Genesis tier would be able to break it, Small Tower replied. Ling Han's eyes widened, and he said, then wouldn't it have to be someone of the Genesis tier? Small Tower did not reply, apparently thinking that this question was very stupid, so it could not even be bothered to answer. Then this shield is really quite useful. Unfortunately, it's too small. Ling Han appeared quite satisfied because the stone slab was completely capable of absorbing attacks, and if properly used, it would show amazing effect. But because it was too small, if he encountered a powerful demonic beast that used its mountain-like body to smash him, it would be a complete waste as it would not be able to protect him at all. When met with the punch of an elite, or even transformed into something akin to a star, it would be completely ineffective as well. That would depend on how it's used. Ling Han came out of the Black Tower. Immediately, the terrifying water pressure surged over. He tried to use the absolute beginning stone, and it was really effective. Wherever he placed it, the pressure there would disappear completely. Unfortunately, he could only protect a spot about the size of his palm. Ling Han simply treated it like a protection for his heart. The heart, the head, and Dantian were the three most crucial vital points of any cultivator. Losing the first two could be fatal, whereas the Dantian was the source of one's power. If it was broken, then one would be equivalent to a cripple. He began to float towards the surface of the sea. Because there was powerful gravity, the buoyancy also seemed to have completely disappeared. The speed that he was floating upwards at was very slow. Boom! The waters rippled, and a huge demonic beast suddenly appeared ahead of him. It was a giant crocodile that possessed as many as 6 legs, and was over 900 meters long. It was completely covered in scales that were even larger than the lid of a well. Merely its tail alone was more than 300 meters long. Ling Han could see it because its 2 eyes were shining with light like 2 balls of fire. At the same time, he also felt an indescribable pressure. The Sun-Moon tier. The giant crocodile had also discovered his presence, and immediately accelerated with a swing of its tail, opening its mouth to eat him. Ling Han did not have any intention of escaping by a fluke. He directly ducked into the Black Tower. If this huge mouth bit down, it was definitely not something that could be blocked by the absolute beginning stone. It might not even be able to fully protect his heart, and the other parts of his body would be turned into mush. The huge crocodile's mouth snapped shut with a loud sound, but a hint of confusion shone in its eyes because it had not bitten anything at all. Whew! The sea waters surged. This time, the Black Tower was not swallowed down by the huge crocodile, because there was a massive gap in between its teeth. The Black Tower had long since flowed out with the water, and was immediately pushed out a few hundred meters away by the powerful waves. The Sun-Moon tier is really too powerful, Ling Han mused inside the Black Tower. If he had met with an opponent in the consummate level of Mountain River tier, then even if he was no match for the other party, he would have still held up for a while somehow. Just like when he had been simultaneously attacked by the 5 demonic beasts in the consummate level of Mountain River tier. He had only spat out a few mouthfuls of blood back then. However, he believed that he would be instantly reduced to a mush of flesh and blood if he was really bitten by this colossal crocodile. The gap was really much too big. The huge crocodile had an obvious wrinkle in its brow. When one had reached the kind of cultivation level it was on, its intelligence was completely awakened, and it was not the slightest bit different from any humans. It was merely unwilling to take on human form in the deep sea. If not, others would really be unable to tell how it was different from other humans. A mere cultivator in Mountain River tier was actually capable of evading its bite? Strange. The giant crocodile swam around the area for a while, but in the end, it left with a wave of its strong tail, causing water to surge. Ling Han came out of the Black Tower, planning to once again float to the sea's surface, yet suddenly felt alarmed. Immediately, he once again entered into the Black Tower. Boom! The giant crocodile actually charged back silently without any warning, and released a fierce attack towards him. So crafty and cunning. Ling Han shook his head. He definitely could not underestimate it just because it was a crocodile. To be able to cultivate to the Sun-Moon tier, How many thousands of years had this crocodile been alive? A demonic beast at shattering void tier would awaken its intelligence completely. From that point onwards, it had lived so many years, so its intelligence would definitely not be inferior to any wise man's of the human race. Underestimating it was absolutely courting death. But that pounce from the giant crocodile caused the violent surging of the sea waters. The Black Tower would not be affected by the special gravity of this place, and so it went with the natural flow, moving with the water. How powerful was the strength of a sun-moon tier cultivator. Furthermore, the pounce just now was planned out by the giant crocodile, so the power it unleashed was really very strong, pushing the Black Tower far away. In a few breaths' time, it had floated over a dozen miles away. Ling Han waited for a while, and when he felt that it was calm, came back out of the Black Tower. He had not surfaced for long when a terrifying feeling was once again felt by him. He hurriedly ducked back into the Black Tower. Bang! True indeed, that gigantic crocodile had reappeared. Fuck, why was this animal so determined not to let him escape? Ling Han was speechless. Had this massive crocodile discovered that he had disappeared in a way that was too unnatural, and sensed that there was an incredible treasure in his possession? If you want to follow, then just follow. I will go and be intimate with my wife, and you just wait patiently. He simply went to seek out Shui Yenyu, tormenting this seductive beauty so much that she was flushed red. She repeatedly called him a pervert, yet was also delighting in the treatment, half resisting and half welcoming it. Her beautiful eyes were like spring water, releasing an air of charm and captivation, stirring Ling Han's appetite greatly. At this time, he did not have the time to care about the huge crocodile outside, and thus, he did not realize that the Black Tower had actually been drawn into a channel with the flow of the water. This channel was unfathomably deep, and there was an endless darkness at the bottom. The large crocodile had swum here once before, but it was so scared that it turned with a sweep of its tail immediately and fled in the opposite direction. If Ling Han had also noticed this detail, perhaps he would have immediately come out of the Black Tower and would not have allowed the Black Tower to fall in no matter what. But now, he was completely ignorant of the situation outside, just going with the flow of the water, which brought him into the endlessly deep abyss. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu were whispering sweet nothings to each other to pass the time, waiting for that giant crocodile to leave by itself out of impatience. He came out of the Black Tower. Fuck! He only felt as if all the bones inside his body had been shattered, immediately releasing cracking sounds. Why was it like this? Ling Han was confused. The water pressure here was extremely frightening, and this was something that he had been aware of. However, it was definitely not serious to this extent. Even if he channeled his origin power, it was useless this time. In an instant, over a dozen of his bones had been broken, and they even turned into shattered pieces. He could not hold on. He immediately entered into the Black Tower, and then channeled the indestructible Heaven Scroll. His bones began to heal, and after about 30 minutes, he was completely recovered. Why has the pressure suddenly become so strong? Ling Han observed the outside world from within the Black Tower, but it was completely dark there, and the surroundings were completely different from before. Ahead of them, there was a somewhat weak light, flickering. Oh no! Who knows where the waves created by that massive crocodile have drawn us to? Ling Han was lost for words. Previously, he merely went to be intimate with Shui Yenyu, and paid completely no attention to the change in surroundings. Now, he was actually brought into such a dangerous place. With such terrifying water pressure, all the bones in my body would probably be shattered in only a single breath's time. How am I going to float to the surface of the sea? Then, wouldn't that mean that I am eternally trapped in this place? Hold on, something ahead is glowing. Perhaps it will bring around a turn in luck. Now that things were like this, Ling Han could only try everything and anything in this desperate situation. He immediately came out of the Black Tower and caused waves with a palm strike. Then, he quickly ducked back inside to allow the Black Tower to float towards that glowing spot by itself. It was naturally very slow. Furthermore, the water did not flow according to his will, and would frequently float in the wrong direction. Hence, the speed with which they were nearing that point of light was extremely slow. However, no matter how slow he was closing in on it. After about less than half a day, Ling Han could finally clearly see that point of light. It was actually a box. It was made of jade, and it was exuding a milky white light by itself. It was that box. Ling Han recognized it with a single glance. It was precisely the treasured box that Zhu Yueyun and Ho Yang had been fighting over. He had never thought that neither of them had gotten a hold of it, and this box had actually fallen into such a place. Am I fortunate or unfortunate, then? Ling Han scratched at his head. If he was lucky, then how would he have fallen into such a crisis? It was practically desperate straits. Then, if he was unlucky, well, the treasure that two great elites of heavenly body tier had been fighting over had actually fallen onto a place that was not far from him. Who cares if I'm lucky or unlucky? I'll first get a hold of the treasure. Otherwise, I would definitely be unlucky. Ling Han tried the same trick again and floated towards that box. He was slowly approaching. Finally, there was only an arm's distance left. Ling Han left the Black Tower in a flash and grabbed the box with a stretch of his arm. He was just about to retreat back into the Black Tower. However, just in that instant, a black gas also spread out. It had previously been hidden underneath the jade box, and now, like an octopus that had stretched out its tentacles, it wrapped around Ling Han. In that instant, a strong feeling of impending danger rose up in Ling Han's heart. He felt that if he was entwined by this thing, it would definitely be worse than suffering a palm strike from an elite of the Sun-Moon tier. He quickly tried to hide back into the Black Tower, but that black-colored aura actually followed him closely like a shadow, sticking tightly onto the jade box. Shua, it entered with it into the Black Tower. Furthermore, the black-colored gas was spreading out too quickly and had already entwined Ling Han's hand. Incomparably confusing thought was rushing up against Ling Han, causing him to completely lose all reason as if he was about to go mad. Duo! Small Tower appeared and shouted at him. The black gas dispersed like fog, instantly transforming into millions of silken threads. However, it was very stubborn, and a stream of black gas was still sticking onto Ling Han's hand and boring into his body. More and more, the whole black fog was shrinking back and gushing into Ling Han's body. Boom! A scene of battle arose in Ling Han's mind. Two great elites were battling among the stars. One attack was enough to even shatter the stars far away, causing the sun to eternally lose its brightness. He was astonished. What level were these elites at? The Genesis tier? One of the two fighting was an old man whose skin was completely gold in color. He was very fat and was all smiles. He also had a big, round tummy, and his earlobes were extraordinarily big. They actually touched his shoulder. His head, meanwhile, was completely bald. This caused Ling Han to recall one of the pirates he had encountered before. He was obviously a mad murderer, but when he practiced his cultivation technique, he actually had an air of dignity and stately grace. The feeling this old man gave him was the same, an incredibly sacred air full of great mercy that transcended all life. On the other side of the battle was a man who looked to be only in his 40s. His upper body was bare, and all his muscles were bulging. However, what was unusual was the fact that there were actually multiple divine patterns on his skin. They did not seem to be engraved on his skin, but rather cast from some kind of metal. Not only was that the case, there were over a dozen sharp spikes growing on his back. They had all sprouted from his spine, and each spike was over half a meter long, making for a frightening sight. A black chi entwined around his entire body, which gave Ling Han a feeling of familiarity. Demonic chi. Right, that was precisely demonic chi. This man was a great elite of the netherworld, and the golden-skinned old man was obviously one of the immortal realm. This was a battle between the two most powerful elites from the two realms. In their great battle, they could change the shape of their bodies according to their will. There were times when they were the size of ordinary humans, but there were other times when they were zillions of meters tall. With a stretch of their arm, they could easily grab a star nearby and smash it into the other. In the fierce battle between these two titans, the surrounding stars had been completely ravaged, multiple blinding spots of light lighting up the dark universe. Ling Han could feel his hair stand on ends just from watching. A whole star was smashed into bits, and there was a massive conflict involving the regulations of heaven and earth. That kind of destructive power was capable of utterly ruining everything. Even elites of the heavenly body tier would only be insta-killed in this kind of battle. However, this kind of conflict did not have the slightest negative effect on these two people. They merely continued such an utterly destructive battle, and created even greater destruction. Yet finally, the man from the netherworld was no match for his opponent. He was hit with a great attack, his body sent flying, and directly shattering a star. Meanwhile, he was stuck to a shattered piece of the star, and streaked towards the depths of the universe. This powerful move directly shattered his physical body, and erased his divine sense as well. In theory, he was definitely and completely dead, with no hope of survival. He streaked through the universe alongside this shattered piece of star for who knew how long, and finally crashed into a planet, turning a plane into a massive sea. Star Sea. Ling Han finally understood. In the past, two ultimate elites had been battling, with one being defeated or even killed. His body alongside a broken piece of a celestial body crashed down right into Joint Peace Planet. This was the origin of the Star Sea. But what no one knew was that one of the fighters was actually a great elite from the netherworld. Was he in the Genesis tier? Ling Han had not yet completed this thought when he saw a stream of chaos attack him, causing him to be filled with killing intent. Kill, 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 he wanted to kill all the people of this realm. This was the remaining will of that great elite from the netherworld. He had to have died long ago, but even if this kind of existence left behind merely a shattered piece of his will, that would be sufficient to affect any who came after. Now, the demonic chi was influencing Ling Han's heart, wanting to erase his original self and turn him completely into a demon. Ling Han humphed. If this was outside, he might be affected, but this was inside the Black Tower. The Genesis tier was indeed the greatest power of the current era, but this elite from the netherworld had died who knew how many years ago, so how much power could he still have left? Ling Han drew upon the power of the Black Tower to resist the demonic chi. This was not his first time. Long ago, in the Devil Sky Mystery Realm, he had already resisted the demonic chi of the Azura Demon Emperor. Of course, compared to the stream of demonic chi, the Azura Demon Emperor was practically trash. However, Ling Han's abilities had also changed massively since that time. Furthermore, the power of the Black Tower had also been restored quite a bit since then. Was that still not enough to suppress you? Ling Han whittled away endlessly at the demonic chi. The berserk, chaotic, and bloodthirsty factors had all been worn down, leaving behind only the purest essence, which sunk into Ling Han's dantian. At first, there was only a speck which turned into a ball, but it was about the size of an egg then. What was shocking was the fact that the essence was filled with power, and could be absorbed by his mountain river. Ling Han immediately discovered that his second great mountain was growing at an astonishing pace. Going by that trend, he would be able to reach the middle stage of the medium extreme in about a month's time, close to the late stage, and form his second great river from there. This was really too astonishing. It had to be known that breaching every minor level in mountain river tier would take long millennia. Only Zhao Luan, Sha Yuan, and other such descendants that managed to obtain terrifyingly bountiful resources would be able to complete such accumulation in a short few centuries. But Ling Han, going by this kind of rate, he might be able to reach the peak stage of consummate level in only a few years. There is no need to be shocked. This is the lifetime essence of a demon master. Small Tower suddenly spoke up. Demon Master. Though Ling Han had expected this, he was still shocked. Demon Master, an equivalent to the saints of the immortal realm, was in existence in the Genesis tier. The will and physical body of the Demon Master has long been worn away, but Genesis tier is really too powerful. Even a portion of his body could last for a few 100 million years, influencing this sea, Small Tower said. Ling Han nodded. Precisely because of the effect of the corpse of the Demon Master, this sea was affected, creating such incredibly shocking gravity. In truth, that was a kind of power of regulation. An elite of the Genesis tier would affect the regulations of the heaven and earth, and who would not be influenced? No wonder demonic chi would seep out of that pit on the Earth's core island. It had to be connected with this area of sea. Ling Han looked inward at his dantian. The last bit of essence from the dantian had turned into a black ball. It was so black that it would cause one to shudder inwardly. Furthermore, the endless power was also spreading out through this ball-like form, nurturing his physical body and raising his cultivation level. This was something that was taking place at all times, and going by that trend, it was enough to help him reach the sun-moon tier. That was natural. It was the lifetime essence of a demon master. What would be strange about it raising Ling Han to the sun-moon tier? On the contrary, if it were not for the fact that time had passed too quickly, and that it had lost a great portion of its essence, it might have even been capable of raising Ling Han to the heavenly body tier or even the eternal river tier. Thankfully, the power of this essence is spreading out bit by bit. I would definitely explode from its force otherwise. A lingering fear rose up in Ling Han. Being capable of raising his cultivation level to the sun-moon tier in a short time. How terrifying was this power? Also, this ball of power was staying in his body. It was like a time bomb. It would really keep one on edge and scared. However, the most important thing is not the quick boost to cultivation level, but rather the demon master's comprehension of the regulations of heaven and earth contained in this, the regulations of heaven and earth of the netherworld. I only need to reach a corresponding level, and I would be able to comprehend the regulations from both the immortal realm and the netherworld, which is the very most frightening part. But I heard that the two realms were opposed to each other, remaining in an inharmonious relationship. If I'm not careful, I may not be able to merge the regulations of the two realms. Instead, I myself would be driven mad. The regulations of the two realms would conflict, and I'd die. Forget it. This is something that I should consider only after I have stepped into the Genesis tier, so I'll just think about it later. According to that theory, the reason why the star sea would have such a powerful gravity field is because of the existence of the demon master. Now that I have absorbed the essence of the demon master, wouldn't this great sea be no different from any ordinary sea? Haha! I can leave this place. TSK, I am indeed very lucky. When I opened the sky, I was instilled with good fortune from the heaven and earth. That is definitely no mere empty words. Furthermore, a thought flashed in Ling Han's head. The demonic power source in his dantian, this was the name that he came up with for that lump of essence from the demon master. After all, if he called it essence, he felt that it was somewhat filthy, immediately spread out threads of demonic chi. His air immediately changed, and there was a black gas circling around his whole body, as if he had transformed into a demon himself. Haha! I can pass myself off as a person from the netherworld. I'll let the Azura Demon Emperor come take a look to see if there are any discrepancies. Ling Han cracked a grin. Ling Han called the Azura Demon Emperor over, and said, "Watch me!" "Yes, master, oh great master." The Azura Demon Emperor was working hard to improve his flattery skills, and he immediately started to perform with all his might. Master is truly becoming nobler and mightier by the day. When I stand before you, it's as if I'm standing before the sun. Before your brilliant radiance. I only want to kneel down and pray for your longevity. It is you who have brought this world light. It is you who have brought this world hope. Okay. Stop trying to flatter me. Tell me how I look now. Ling Han channeled the demonic power source, causing a black shadow to instantly envelop him. His appearance didn't change significantly, yet the aura radiating from his body seemed completely different from before. Master? The Azura Demon Emperor instantly plopped to his knees. The aura that radiated from Ling Han was far too terrifying, far surpassing that of any great elite that he had ever seen in the netherworld. This was the aura of a demon master. Master, could it be that you're a great elite from the netherworld? The Azura Demon Emperor asked, stuttering. No, of course I'm a human. It's just that I coincidentally managed to absorb the power of a demon master, Ling Han explained. Do I seem any different from beings of the netherworld right now? No, not in the least. The Azura Demon Emperor hurriedly shook his head and said, Master, you're fundamentally no different from beings of the netherworld. No. In terms of essence, you're in fact countless times nobler than them. Oh, dear master, please allow little Azura to embrace your leg. Piss off. Ling Han kicked the Azura Demon Emperor aside. Do you think you can act cute just because you're in the body of a wolf? Ling Han waved his hand and threw the Azura Demon Emperor into some distant corner in the Black Tower. He then summoned the Jade Box over again. This Jade Box was extremely sturdy, and even elites at the Heavenly Body tier wouldn't be able to open it. If he were outside, Ling Han also wouldn't be able to open it. However, he was in the Black Tower right now. He examined the Jade Box and discovered that it was actually one seamless entity. It was like a naturally formed piece of jade, though its large size made it seem more like a box. He shook his head, unable to sense whatever lay inside the jade. Since I can't find any seams, I'll use brute force to open it. Ling Han used his fingers like a knife and dragged them across the jade. The boundless power of the Black Tower flowed into him, making him feel as if he were an omnipotent god. Open, he said softly. Pa! The jade box was cut open by him, and sure enough it was hollow inside. There was only a piece of silver paper resting in it. Ling Han tried to pick it up, yet his expression changed drastically as a burst of sword light suddenly slashed over. It was as quick as lightning, and impossible for him to dodge. Ding! Small Tower appeared and blocked the sword light, and then said, "What despicable deeds did you perform? Why are you targeted by everyone everywhere you go? Heh! Will you die if you don't bag me for a while?" Ling Han mulled over the sword strike as he walked over. That strike had been incredibly quick, yet that was only because he hadn't drawn on the power of the Black Tower to avoid it. After all, who would be wary of a piece of paper? Could this be the decree of a supreme being? Ling Han was prepared this time, and he summoned the power of the Black Tower around his body. Right now, perhaps only cultivators at the Genesis tier would be able to threaten him. He reached toward the piece of silver paper again. Show! Another burst of sword light slashed toward Ling Han. So fast! Although he was already prepared, Ling Han was still surprised by the astonishing speed of the sword light. In fact, it was even quicker than his annihilating Dragon Star arrow. This kind of speed was completely abnormal. Wang! The sword light ground to a halt as it arrived before Ling Han's body. This was unavoidable as Ling Han was like a true god in the space contained within the Black Tower. Even the speed of the sword light could do him no harm. Ling Han's heart thumped with excitement, and he exclaimed, "What on earth is this? How is it so domineering?" He believed that he had genuinely come across an extremely valuable item. As expected of a treasure fought over for by two heavenly body tier elites. He unfolded the silver paper, and was faced with an even more relentless attack as countless bursts of sword light slashed over in unison. It was as if tens of millions of sword lights were surging over together. A wall of light appeared before Ling Han's body. It was formed due to the tremendous number and density of sword lights. Vanish! Ling Han humphed softly, and the bursts of sword light disappeared one after another, their might receding like a falling wave. This feels amazing. Ling Han sighed in his mind. It would be great if I could physically summon the Black Tower. If I were able to do that, I would be able to force others into the Black Tower and then suppress them. If Empress Luanxing or the Emperor of the Eternity Sky Majestic Empire were trapped inside, their only option would be to submit to me. The piece of silver paper finally stabilized and stopped producing bursts of sword light. However, there wasn't a single word on the piece of paper. It was completely blank. This doesn't make any sense. There were so many layers of protection just for this piece of blank paper? Impossible! With a thought, Ling Han's divine sense entered the piece of paper. Countless pieces of information instantly surged into his mind. For form sword technique. Eventually, only these 4 words remained in his mind. This piece of silver paper had been left by an elite who had lived a long, long time ago. He was a grandmaster of the Sword Dao, and people referred to him as the Invincible Sword Saint. The title Saint signified that he was a great elite who had reached the Genesis tier. Generally speaking, however, even those at the Genesis tier didn't dare refer to themselves as Sword Saint, Saber Saint, and so on. This was because such titles implied that one was the most powerful in a certain field. That being the case, one who claimed such a title could expect countless cultivators who were masterful in the same field to challenge them relentlessly. After all, no one would easily acknowledge such titles. Of course, the invincible sword saint hadn't given this title to himself. Rather, this had been a publicly acknowledged title. Moreover, not only was he titled a sword saint, but his title even had the word invincible in it, signifying that he was even more powerful. It was extremely likely that he was the strongest cultivator of the sword Dao in history. Meanwhile, his strongest sword technique was the four-form sword technique, which consisted of 4 parts: the fast technique, slow technique, chaotic technique, and calm technique. What was recorded on the piece of paper was the fast technique. Ling Han sighed with emotion after roughly experiencing the sword technique. As expected of a sword technique created by a great elite at the Genesis tier, this isn't something that ordinary people can practice. It was because this sword technique required its wielder to possess a powerful physique. As its name implied, the fast technique focused on speed. Its speed was incredible, so much so that it would surpass the limits of its wielder's cultivation level. This involved the breaking of regulations, which was why one needed to have an extremely strong physique. Otherwise, one's body would be obliterated by the regulations before they could even start to break the said regulations. This technique suits me perfectly. Ling Han was over the moon. The fast technique simply required one's physique to be at the same level as their cultivation level. However, Ling Han's physique was already a level above his cultivation level. This implied that his mastery of the fast technique could perhaps even surpass the invincible sword saint if they were to be compared at the same cultivation level. However, the invincible sword saint only achieved great accomplishment in the 4-form sword technique after advancing to the Genesis tier. This involves the regulations of the Genesis tier, so I might be unable to comprehend this sword technique's essence. Ling Han shook his head. His comprehension was indeed astonishing, yet due to the restrictions posed by his cultivation level, he was still unable to comprehend techniques of the Genesis tier. Forget about it. Let me practice this sword technique and see how it goes. It's about time that I raised my sword skills.